Show us more helping.
Oh, there we go. All-in user one. All right, maybe we're connected now.
That language sounded like positive.
It did. Like, got calling user one here, so that's promising. I think that.
That's up. All right, there's coffee, there's some fruit and bars. Thank you so much. Yeah. How is the driving out there? For me, coming up from Glenwood, it was fine. Okay. It's starting to kind of accumulate, and like I left super early and was like, I'll just sit at Plofsky's and eat breakfast. As long as I get there. But coming down, I think is getting kind of sketchy. Okay. Yeah, I got a notification that there's car accidents in Aspen, so it's like, oh, let's be doing something up there. I think there's one out on the highway too. I think I just saw that the main exit or the west exit of Glenwood is closed. But I thought I just saw Kurt's truck go by. We'll see.
Mitch.
Hey. Now, in this situation, is the door.
It should be
propped.
propped.
Yep. Yeah.
Mitch,
Hi.
off mute for you. Well, that off mute for you.
Exactly.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being able to make it on short notice.
I even read it all, even better.
Did you really?
Yeah.
That's some commitment.
I wanted to know what I was getting into. How's everybody doing?
Good. Yeah. There's some fruit and coffee if you
Okay.
so desire. Right. See if I can get logged on and then I'll record it and try and keep an eye out for anybody online.
I thought I saw that recording started.
It should have started automatically.
So it might have been going for 26 minutes now.
Okay. That's okay. I learned how to trim it
Oh, there you go.
in
Perfect.
WebEx so that what we want gets covered.
All right.
Gonna respond to Erin,
Oh, what Darren said, her message.
that she's just late.
Okay.
I think the weather's pretty bad down Valley.
Yeah.
Of course, only when you want to have a meeting and people get here.
I know, right?
I'm on the CMC advisory board
Okay.
and they had a meeting. We had a big storm like 3 weeks ago. So I left here an hour and a half early.
Uh-huh.
It took me 2 hours to get there from here to Aspen.
Oh,
But it was terrible. That day was a disaster.
wow.
So I never made it.
Gee.
Have you heard from how many staff might be? I know
Let me look back in my emails because
the only one I've heard from is Brian, and he said he couldn't make it.
I heard truck. Well, Mirda is either gonna be here WebEx or in person. I think she was gonna take the bus down. Say, yeah, he's gonna be virtual.
Kurt?
Hey,
Hey.
how are you? Good. Good.
First you met me.
I'm not.
Nice
to meet you.
you. Used to
Kurt
work,
Ravenschlag.
yep, used to work for the city of Aspen, now I work for downtown.
Oh, okay. Nice.
I had to work with him at EOTC, so
Yeah.
Stolen his.
I'm will be virtual. Jared, we're planning on attending.
No,
Oh, Garina.
Carino. Oh,
Sam's on vacation.
that,
Sam's on vacation, is that what you said?
I think he's virtual, you said?
Or
Virtual.
Yeah, I would have been surprised if Sam would have,
Are they attending it public or?
yeah, it's too public. Did you get the message? So there's no formal public part to this.
Keep my mouth shut, is that what you mean? I got it.
So if they have any questions that they'll ask, but there's not like a formal.
Yeah.
I guess that,
Sometimes.
yeah, it helps.
Last questions.
Like, Bill.
More none. Hey,
They call a spade a spade.
there's coffee.
Listen and take
Thank you.
notes.
Oh,
For questions if. I can do that.
I figured you.
So, yeah. Just happy to be here.
well, Theron and Corey are running late.
Yes, I'm sure with the weather.
Yep. Aaron and Tori are both late. Yep. Tori called me on my way over, and then you just saw Aaron's email. And then David Knight is gonna join virtually. He's not feeling well.
Mouse got into my
I was gonna say.
charging cable.
Well, that's all good.
It's like it's seen better days.
Well, it's not
Look
mine.
at the other end.
Well, I found them. I'd lost my charging cable at a board meeting. Somebody made off with it. And I couldn't plug my computer in. I went and found that and I think it was pulled off it.
Imagine if he's got a pile of those things.
You'd think.
I think Mike said he was coming.
Chat. I don't think there was anybody who had originally declined, so I think it would just be any changes due to weather this morning.
Yeah, Colin.
The party?
From the facilities. I think that's what that's from.
Very fun.
It is.
Yeah, and I think they had also dressed up the skeleton at some point too.
For a Christmas party?
Yeah, like the skeleton starting to wear Christmas attire. Minor, yes.
They've transitioned from
They're
Halloween to
transitioning.
Christmas.
Not all of them. I only pull out like one or two for Christmas, but they put the lights on the house.
I've had this really big blue spruce in my front yard. It's just like perfectly shaped.
Nice. Hello.
And
Good morning.
Good. Colin.
How was the commute over?
Excellent.
Colin rode his bike. He's a good person today. I drove. You know, it's supposed to be some fun. Wore my Rio Grande Trail hat though. So I get bonus points for that, right? All right, all right. We're repping.
Coffee over here.
Oh, wow.
Over there.
Well, that's very nice. Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Bill's gonna be able to join us remotely, hopefully.
good morning.
Yeah.
Was it about my bank?
Yeah. No, I think you're wrapping me.
Okay.
I work for downtown.
Downtowner. Great. Hey, Mitch, glad you're here. How are you?
Yeah. I'm going to DC on Wednesday. Ashley, part of the time, and then some other people. You want me to stay to Pete?
Oh, hey.
That's what they say, but I don't, we'll see if he shows up.
Yeah.
I want to bring him back out here to do a victory lap.
Oh, I know. Maybe. Morning there. Yeah, I might.
Am I okay here? Or
You're
you
perfectly
need this
fine.
space?
Not at all. If I need to, I decide. I will. How was your trip down?
The trip down was great until I hit the roundabout here and just got totally sideways in the roundabout. Really? Yeah, and I got studded all-wheel drive, but just like came into the roundabout a little bit strong and just like drifting through the roundabout.
Oh, fun.
It was fun.
I'm glad you didn't hit anything.
Yeah.
On your drift.
And I don't know, whose ID4 is that? Does somebody else have an ID4?
I don't know.
Oh, there's a beat. I thought it might be Jeannie. She's got one. I thought, well, just turning around here, I thought, be ironic if I were to run into another one of those. But everything else, it was easy, the rest of it. Bit of a whiteout.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to just be during the day.
Yeah,
Kind of nice if it wasn't first thing in the morning.
that blowing snow was. Glad to see it, actually. Do long meetings, I bring my slippers.
Are we getting the WebEx up for David?
Yeah, the WebEx is.
It's up.
Okay, great. Thanks for doing that. And it sounds like Erin was running a minute late, so maybe we'll give her a moment and
Yeah.
then we'll.
And Tori is also running a touch late.
Oh, good. I didn't know Tori was gonna be able to make it. I thought
Yep.
it didn't date from the start, but that's
Yeah.
great.
And it looks like we've got a Lynn Rumba with Aspen
Okay.
online as well.
WebEx, so I can see it.
Well, I'm getting more comfortable with Carbondale. I went to the co-op and got my dog treats that I always get, the big bag of dog treats. And then I realized they have free coffee, and it's the first time I've ever taken them up on it. So
There is coffee over here in the corner
Okay,
and then
excellent.
snacks back here.
probably better than theirs, but anyway, it was taking advantage of free coffee.
3 foot long prefix.
Oh, I haven't seen that. I haven't delved into that yet. Yeah, need a chainsaw. And then I met a friend at Bonfire and I had to sneak my coffee in. And you're from, tell me your name again, so I correct.
Mitch.
Right, yeah, good to see you, right.
Nice to see you
Long
again.
time.
Yeah, I'm working for Downtowner now.
Oh, right, okay, God,
Did you call it working?
good to know. I didn't realize that. I guess I'd heard that and then Been a long time. Yeah, good to see you. Thank you for saying,
What were you doing before that?
I was the parking and downtown services director for the city of Aspen for
Gotcha.
7 years. Then I worked for Snowmass for a year and a half. But started downtowner in,
excellent. Well, we've got your email in here somewhere, I'm sure.
Where do I find the WebEx link? I just feel like I should be able to see.
Well, it should be on the invite, but I can forward it to you if you did. Yeah, right now, so it's up here.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Good for that myself.
I will add you then, Kurt.
It was in the meeting.
I mean, technology that works.
I think you have to go to the website.
I just forwarded it to you, Kurt, as well.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I shouldn't bring this up, but the IT people now are the most important people in the room. All the, I shouldn't say that. You're doing the IT. No, we're hiring our county attorney, and I've been joking with Ryan Neely, who's our, did a process. He's clearly the one we want to keep. But I said, you have to tell us about your IT skills, because we'll be in a meeting and he'll be the only one who can make the thing.
I think that's your computer.
I'm not on, but
Yeah, computers in the room could just be muted. You could call in.
I'll just not even go there.
All right. No, it's not here.
Hey,
Hey,
Lynn,
Lynn?
are you
Are
able
you
to hear
able-
us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Guess I didn't need to do that.
I think you're the only one. Easy to call into the.
Well, that's separate. So that is actually on user one. If this deal over here. We're waiting on Tori and Aaron.
Yeah, Tori was in Basalt. Let's see, when he called me.
Well, maybe we could get started with some of our kind of administrative things.
No, the quorum is the same one.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Great.
Three, and we have somebody online.
We don't have.
No, we don't.
No, I think it's form 4.
Okay,
Okay.
well, I'll get a cup of coffee.
Settle in.
I guess you're on hold.
But David's not online yet?
He is not.
Oh, okay. He checks in, we'll have it.
It is.
It wasn't too bad.
But Greg is the,
It didn't start snowing.
he tripped.
It is.
Uh,
Airport, FAA, DOT, airport
So-
transportation, raise grants is what we're going after.
See all.
What did that allow you to do?
Yeah.
I can't even tell you entirely.
Is
It's
there-
it's
is there-
basically
there's another
initial
one?
design
Okay.
and development.
Okay.
But I don't have specifics, but I will when I
Okay.
get there.
Sure, you never know.
And then I think we're meeting with the head of the Forest Service who requested a meeting with us.
Oh, no,
So that'll be kind of interesting.
potentially about their site, adventures.
Well, I'm hoping, and then also, we've got various proposals to them. But the biggest thing is just about how they don't want to fund, they're not going to fund any new seasonal hires or anything like that. They've laid down the law and they won't allow us to pay for it, even if we did.
Really?
Because that, our practice has been to hire additional rangers. And they're saying, no, we're not going to allow this anymore. And we're thinking, well, we need the rangers, you know, we're happy to pay for it. You know, for the really high sensitive areas, the Bells and North Star and all that. And apparently the new policy is no, you can't do that. But that, what do we have to do? Come up with our own
You can have
county
one-
marshal.
Yeah.
We can all be, you know, deputized or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess, so it'll be interesting to see it, and it's kind of interesting. I don't know why he seems to be eager to talk to us. Maybe he wants a job, you know, things are changing. Maybe he's looking for the head of the Forest Service.
Scott.
No, the guy in DC, whose name is, I don't, I just heard his name this morning at that. Sure, I'd love to talk to him.
Sound like the voice of God.
Well, it was his, you know, we were talking to his underlings.
Well, we did find a workaround to their dilemma.
Oh,
And we'd welcome Picken County's support as well, if you want to share what we're doing.
So we typically, historically, collected 65 cents per ticket sale and held that aside and remitted that to the Forest Service to hire seasonals at the Maroon.
didn't even occur to me, you guys are in the same boat. Right.
And so doing now on the suggestion of the Forest Service is we're looking at developing an agreement with Rocky Mountain Youth Corps to send that money to Rocky Mountain Youth Corps to hire those people to be supervised by the Forest Service. So to get around that whole not sending money to the Forest Service, the Forest Service couldn't guarantee that if we sent it to them,
It would ever
it would
get,
be stipends off for other
I get it.
purposes.
Now I understand. Is the quality of the help, when I heard youth corps, I thought, does this mean like kids that are green and?
Good kids. I guess the Ashton Silver's district has used them in the past for the last several years, and they've had good luck with them. I don't know if it's been their full contracted staff up there. We're able to find probably 4 to 5 seasonals out of what we
Right.
have available. But that might be an option if Picken County is interested. They might need some additional staff, so reaching out to Kendra over at the Forest Service to see
That might
if
be,
that might be an option, because then if we've got an agreement with Rocky Mountain Youth Corps, if the county has an agreement, then it can,
right,
from Rocky Mountain Youth Corps' perspective.
that might work. Can we share that, your agreement? Could you share that with Peacock, for instance?
We haven't established it yet, so I'm going back and forth with to do now to try to get that set out. So they're going to draft.
So are
it.
you gonna pay you'll pay the youth corps, for 65 cents per ticket for the youth corps?
Yeah.
And then
And
they-
then the agreement will say that they're supervising.
That sounds great. Maybe that's the solution. Maybe that's what we're gonna talk about. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just a,
Corey? There he is. Good morning.
Corey, there's coffee over there if you need it.
Don't touch the stuff, thank you.
You just wake up all full of energy and ready to go every day naturally?
I can't handle coffee.
Okay.
I get really high and then I crash really hard.
Yeah, I'm up with that. You got paper copies here, do you want them?
Lovely.
Yeah. that one.
We do have a quorum now.
Yeah, or,
Great.
Aaron's still on the.
Okay. Yeah.
Morning.
Morning.
there we go.
Oh, yeah, great.
I think we got
Well, let's do this then.
Great.
Maybe we could do a quick round of introductions before we call the meeting to order, just because there's few faces on the table and we haven't all actually met in person before. So, I'm happy to start. Ben Baumflock, Mayor of Carbondale and Chair of this committee. Thanks to Tori, for nominating me last time.
Lawyer, Town of Carbondale, and Vice Chair.
Here come out of the police cycle, great to see you all on this snowy morning. Kim Wells, I am Kurt's assistant with RFTA.
Greg Poshman, Pitkin County Commissioner.
I'm Tori, Mayor of Aspen.
Kurt Ravenscroft, CEO of RFTA.
Dave Pesnichek, Chief Operating Officer of RAPTA.
Carrie Harlan, Mobility Coordinator.
Mitch Ozier, the Partnership Director for the downtown.
Oh, and we just got here. That's okay. We were just doing a quick round of introductions, so if
Okay.
you want to introduce yourself,
Yes.
that would be a good start. And we'll,
Right, got your message now.
Great.
right. Great. Well, with that, let's call to order and do roll call, please. I don't know if we need to formally just.
We do have a few folks on.
Okay,
Have them introduce themselves.
sure. Yeah, let's do that. Looks like Lee, if you want to introduce yourself to the group.
Yep, Lee Barger with the city of Glenwood Springs.
And Lynn,
Hi, good morning, Lynn Rumbaugh with the city of Aspen.
great. Thanks for being here, Lynn. What's your role with City of Aspen? Are you on the council or?
Oh, no, I am
Transportation.
with the transportation department staff.
Great, thanks. Morning, Mike. Morning. Did I miss anybody online?
You got it. And David there yet? Nope, not yet. Just one order of business. Because we have 6 RFTA board members, this is a formal public meeting. We do have members of the public here today with 2 in the room, and I think we just had Lee and Lynn online. So there may be a point, I don't know if we have a point for any public comment during the meeting.
We don't have any formal point.
But if members of the board would like to ask for any public comment, you're free to do so during the meeting, so.
Great. Thanks. Okay, with that, then let's keep going. Do we need to do a formal roll call or is that fine? So we just did. Then next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from last time, October 29th.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Second. Motion by Greg, second by Tori. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item number 3 is presentation and action items. So we really just have a presentation and kind of clarifying facts so that we can start from a shared understanding of where we've been and where we are. And then questions for consideration. I appreciate staff putting all this together. I wasn't able to, I thought I should reach out and work on that agenda with that, but that never happened. Seriously though, thank you for putting this together. I was at first intimidated by the length of the packet and thought I might not get to that. And I realized that a lot of it was the IGA that helped. And so I think this is a good base of information and we should be pretty familiar with this stuff because we talked about it. You want to take it from there? Share with us.
Yeah, thank you. I guess before we jump in, I do want to provide a little bit more introduction to Mary over here. When we went around the room, she just started November 4th, so she's very new to the RAP team, come to us here. And very excited to have her. She is the new mobility coordinator, so she will be the main contact going forward, all things first last mile related. So she will be manager of the first last mile grant program, as well as our bike share MOU and SOA, best summary and service operating agreement, as well as hopefully and eventually carrying forward the majority of these meetings going forward. So I did want to provide her a little bit more introduction. She's been soaking up as much information as she can, but yeah, working hard to get up to speed.
Good to see you here.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here and really excited to work with people specifically. So looking forward to it.
Great. Thanks for joining us. And thanks for that introduction, because I was wondering, I was like, when did Mary come into this role? And realizing that it was right after our last meeting is really cool.
And part of the length of time that it took trying to get this packet out, holidays and trying to get everyone on board and figure out who's doing what. So I apologize, it took a little bit longer to get out than I'd have liked, and we'll do our best to get it out. But before we get into the presentation, we have a presentation here to try to set the stage for a conversation. A lot of this is information that you've seen before in the past meetings, and we're going to go over it briefly just to remind you where we are, where we've been, to try to provide a launching point for everybody from the same point. I didn't know that we have some new folks here that may not have seen this or accepted the presentation before. But in terms of what we've discussed to date. So just as a reminder, we did, on August 8th is when we first started diving into first last mile mobility. At that meeting, we discussed the IGA and the formation document, as well as performance and trends for our existing first last mile services that we have out there. On September 12th, we reviewed finances related to the first last mile grant program. Then on October 10th, we had the staff recommendation, and that is when the board decided to formally create this committee. Was on the October 10th meeting. And then we had our first meeting on October 29th. That is where we established the logistics for this committee and how to run these meetings. We also defined our purpose, which I think is really important for us going forward. So that purpose, just to remind you, is to define Rapid's long-term role in FLMM, specifically direct funding. So that's reflected in your meeting minutes, and I'll have it up here again in the presentation. The board formally created the committee on November 14th, and then here we are today with our 3-hour work session this beautiful snowy morning. So as a reminder, we do have 3 hours set aside to this. If we don't need 3 hours, I don't think we should feel obligated to fill the whole thing. We're going to cover the presentation as quickly as we can. It's going to be more of an overview. So like I said, it's not going to go into all of the detail that you saw at the previous presentation. Are there any questions about that? And just generally how we got here, why we're here?
No, we can.
All right.
Do you have something, Tori?
No. Okay, so for clarity, this is the bunker?
Yeah, now we know.
There's the bunker before.
No, I get elegant.
Well, he said how we got here, and I was like, yeah, how did I get here? No.
We're very protective of our cleaning supplies and our.
Hey, everybody. This is David. I'm here. Sorry for running late.
Okay, that's it, night.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for joining us, David.
It's a bummer timing wise.
All right. So to jump in here, so very.
Oh, good, David. I just want to note that David Knight has joined us online. Thanks for being here, David. We're sorry to hear that you're sick today.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry I couldn't be there, but I didn't want to get you all sick, especially this time of year. It's too much.
Yeah, I
fun.
appreciate that.
So very basically, what is first last mile? I think that most of us have an understanding of this. What we're looking at is how rapid customers get to and from that fixed route transit. So we've got traditional modes that have been in place since as long as fixed route transit has been around. So that's primarily walking, private bicycle, private vehicle, and carpooling. But we do have some newer, more or less takes on traditional modes, including bike share and microtransit. And then the graph here at the bottom really just demonstrates that origin destination component to it. So we're really looking at where someone starts their trip, how they get to fixed route transit, and then where they get off fixed route transit and get to their destination. It's those two beginning and end points that we're really discussing. And then for the presentation, so this is an overview of the presentation itself. So first, walk through a little bit of background, the first last mile mobility authorization and the rapid formation IGA. Talk about the first last mile mobility seed funding grant program, an overview of that. And then the bulk of it will be a review of performance and trends that has some updated figures on it. First last mile mobility reserve fund projections, FLMM grant options, remind you of where we left off in terms of the previous staff recommendation, and then leave you all with some topics for the committee discussion to help guide that a little bit. And then just as a reminder, again, the purpose is to define Rapid's long-term role in FLMM and really focusing on that funding.
And David, I might just note that just as far as time, like I feel like our time today is so valuable for the discussion time.
Yeah.
Let's watch our time on this just because we've seen all this. And for the most part, I know it's updated, it's really detailed. We might not have all of that time to dig in, but I'd love to get us toward the discussion, say by 10 o'clock, and that would leave us 2 hours.
Yeah, that's totally feasible.
Great.
Yeah. To step back a little bit in terms of the IGA and how we got here, what are our guardrails around first last mile mobility is really what we're looking at here. So This goes back really to the Colorado Revised Statutes and the Rules Law. So this goes back to really that same law that forms RFTA as an authority. So we do have some ballot language that went out in 2000, and this is important because it does identify that we're focused on that regional service that the RTA did previously, plus, and it's underlined here, plus expanded mass transit and other transportation services in accordance with the intergovernmental agreement, which then leads to the point, what is in that intergovernmental agreement that is relevant to first last mile mobility? And so there's a number of provisions that are within the IGA that really hit on first last mile mobility. The first one, and this is really, in my opinion, the focal point of the IGA is really the purpose of RFTA as an organization. And that is, it states that the purpose of the authority is to finance, construct, operate, and maintain an efficient, sustainable, and regional multimodal transportation system. It also goes on to say that the authority may spend funds on authorized transportation projects that serve residents and businesses as distinguished from regional service. That's important and continues to focus us on that regional component. We do have limitations, and there's a number of limitations in the IGA. The one I want to note again is that it brings us back to only funding and operating authorized transportation projects. So you'll see that it's continually coming up within the IGA, this authorized transportation project. And the IGA defines authorized transportation projects as this section 2.02. So it's circular, if you will, and brings you back up to the purpose and focuses back on that regional multimodal transportation piece. So the IGA also allows the RFTA board, as you're all aware, to create certain bylaws and rules, which the RFTA board has done numerous times over the years. It has also moved forward with the 2018 property tax mill levy increase, and as part of that increase, specifically identified that we are to look at mobility enhancements in pedestrian and bicyclists and transit users, and those enhancements going forward. And then leading up to that in 2021, did pass a number of resolutions that created the first last mile grant program, as well as allowed us to move forward with the memorandum of understanding and the service operating agreement for bike share. So all of this ties back to, yes, we've moved forward with certain provisions of first last mile mobility, specifically around bike share and development of the grant program. But in my opinion, we do need to start to differentiate between what is regional and what is local. So looking back at that previous slide in the IGA, it does really focus us on that regional piece, and the first last mile does start to grade the boundaries between what is local and versus what is it really within RFTA's purview as the regional component. So
I'm sorry, can we just summarize that again? I was a little, when I read it, I was thinking, it looks to me like we've got the green light. But what I hear you're saying is we need to differentiate, and I'm not sure why entirely. I know you explained it, but I need to hear it 2 or 3 times before it sinks in.
So a lot of it goes back to, again, this purpose and regional multimodal transportation system. And where do we draw the lines between regional and local? And we've made that split at certain points in time. So looking at, say, the Aspen service or the Ride Glenwood service, those are considered local services. That is why Aspen and Glenwood Springs pay for those services separately. The introduction of these first last mile, if we're going to start funding them long term, starts to blur those lines because they're both serving those local routes and they're connecting to our trunk routes.
Copy that. Okay. I think I understand that.
I'll add on to that though too. So these are guidelines that were self-imposed when the IGA was drafted back in 2000 by the member jurisdictions that came together. This was the guidance that they created. Under state legislation of a regional transportation authority, it's much broader. So there are a lot more things that you could be doing under an RTA as we are. But the IGA that was created locally did provide these parameters.
if you were to interpret that first paragraph, the 202 purpose, it seems to me that there's a lot of wiggle room here. If you were to parse it and look at the way it's constructed, it seems to me that I'm not too concerned about it, but I understand why you're highlighting it.
I'm not saying we would do this. What are our options for changing some of the language? We don't have to go back to the voters to change the language, we just have to get the members to agree. So if there was a barrier for or against, we could go back, all the members and say, this is what we're considering. This is okay.
That's the way I understand it.
Okay. Just another note about local service. So at the time the IGA was adopted, Aspen and Glenwood Springs already had local service. So, since I was here at the time, one of the ways that was written is to convince the Salt and Carbondale that we weren't paying for that service. So this is a moment in time when we had a different transportation system. Now we're 25 years later, it's a different moment. And I think, to Greg's point, we have some flexibility in how we think of it. And in my mind, it's all about how do we increase transit service? And what's the role first last mile plays in that? We already have a great regional system that can clearly be better, but I think what we've learned is, wow, micromobility is a real opportunity for us. How are we supposed to pay for it? How are we supposed to make it?
Yeah, I think the takeaway here is what David's highlighting here is the language within the current IGA. Language within the current IGA can be amended by the member jurisdiction.
If needed.
Legislative RTA language provides very broad abilities for us to provide transportation services. So if there were things that the board member jurisdictions were interested in, that is available, right? But I think the big question then comes, how do you pay for it?
Yeah, that's what we're all waiting for. I was just going to say, David, you could remove the underline under regional and put it under any location or locations within, and I'd be happy, good to go.
No, this is a helpful review, and I think it is interesting, Colin, to have a historical note, because that's that local service that really emphasizes that it has to be paid for by the locality. And we'll see where we end up, but I'm assuming that this basic framework will still hold up pretty well, and that what we're going to be talking about is the first and last mile connections to the regional service, and we can assume that as part of the regional service, and then whatever else you want to do within your jurisdiction is not RAFTA's responsibility. I mean, that would maintain the spirit. And
Yeah. And I highlight this as a framework for
Yeah.
where we currently are in time, like you said.
okay.
Thank you.
Keep
Thank
going,
you
and
for
I'll
that.
just note for folks online, if you want to talk, just raise your little digital hand there. There's a few of us watching, so we'll make sure that you
Yell at us.
or yell at us.
But for these next few slides, I'd like to start over to Mary's walkthrough.
Actually, David might.
David just, oh no, or you just try it.
That was a thumbs up. Yeah, no, this is a good baseline.
sorry.
Yeah,
Little.
where we are and kind of where we need to work within and potentially adjust just given the current situation versus 2000. So thank you.
Great, thanks, David. We're going to turn up our volume on your end, but also if there's anything you can do to be a little louder when you talk, tell me again.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Great. Okay, let's keep going.
So this chart here just highlights what we have seen to date with the total request of funding. In terms of where we are now, this year we're going to see about $1 million in 2025 of requests. And then that number will likely go down, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Next slide. So this chart shows that the largest user groups are those connecting to and from fixed route transit. So that is really the spirit of first last mile mobility, is looking at those connections between where somebody lives, getting to a fixed route, and then exiting that fixed route and getting either home or to work or to school. Something that this helps solve is things like where parking is limited at the different BRT connections. Additionally, connecting people to and from fixed route transit can relieve congestion for those short 1 to 3 mile trips. So then we get cars off the road. We can also address environmental concerns, economic concerns such as burden of car ownership, et cetera. Next slide, please.
But can you? I need a little bit more here.
Yeah.
What, I don't exactly understand what this means. So,
Oh,
so what do those numbers represent? The percentage of people
yeah.
that are using?
Yeah, sorry about that. So what this means is that 36.13% of people using FLMM services are connecting either to or from a BRT or major RFTA stop.
So of all the bike share trips in Aspen and of all the
Yeah.
microtransit trips in Aspen,
Yeah,
those are the percentages that are connecting to transit.
How do you get to those numbers?
Those are based on numbers provided by Recycle and Downtowner in terms of number of people that are either picked up or dropped off at a BRT or transit stop.
so we can't, the issue is that we can't exactly predict. Sometimes, for example, Ruby Park is a great example of where someone might be getting dropped off at Ruby Park, but they might actually be going to the belly up. And so that's like one of those things where we would like to continue gathering data in order to see exactly where people are going beyond that. So it could be possible that then they say, we can do a survey, or they can say, yeah, I'm going to the belly up, as opposed to getting on the bus.
But these numbers reflect, if you were dropped off
Yeah.
at Ruby Park, we're saying that's connection to transit.
Correct, correct.
This is the best data that we have right now.
That's fine. So it's taken by taking the number of riders on the microtransit or the bike share, and then identifying just their drop off point.
Yeah.
That's pulled from the apps, I assume, rather than surveys.
And that's to or from, right? So that would be a pickup or a drop off at Ruby
Correct.
Park to count as that 5%.
Yeah.
Just a fair comment. I know we discussed this internally, but based on what you just said and based on the fact that we can't really know for sure who's actually getting on a bus or getting off a bus and getting on the Recycle or getting in a microtransit, that the percentages probably represent on the high end of what that connection is. So if we pull out people that don't get on a bus or don't get off a bus and they're just going to the station, it's probably less than this. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so.
Yeah.
And as we discussed at the board meeting too, I would expect that microtransit is probably more accurate in terms of this representation than bike share, because bike share is dock-based as opposed to like the example of Ruby Park and the belly up. Someone on microtransit would say they want to go to the belly up, which wouldn't then count as a Ruby Park trip. Whereas on microtransit, they would still dock the bike at Ruby Park.
Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Right, next slide. So the next 3 charts are going to tell a kind of a story about how FLMM can complement fixed route service. One of our potential anticipations was that potentially the Carbondale circulator ridership might decline, or other local services could possibly decline. But what we have in fact seen is local transit services have continued to steadily increase despite FLMM services being provided. For example, the Carbondale circulator is the fastest growing in Roaring Fork Valley, not including the Hogback. So what you're looking at here And that smaller line out to the right, on the lower right-hand side of the slide, it looks kind of funny, but what that is in July of 2024, microtransit started in Carbondale. So that short blue line is representing microtransit use. The black line is recycle, and then you can see the trends, the kind of steadily increasing trends with both regional transit and circulator boardings. Next slide, please.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Circulated, how, since it's a free service, how are you guys tracking ridership? Is there an infrared thing that gets flipped every time someone gets on? Or is the driver just clicking a button?
On microtransit,
No, the circulator,
Circulator.
cardinal circulator,
the circulator has, yeah, the passenger counters.
avenue counters.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why.
I want to, I'm just wondering, just we've only had since July with microtransit coming into Carbondale. Is the decline in bicycle use at that point reflected in the increase in the microtransit? Is there a direct correlation there? Like, are people stopping riding bikes so they can take a free ride in a car?
I don't know that we have enough data on
Yeah.
that yet.
Yeah, you gotta wonder.
Yes.
One goes
No.
up.
It could
The
be
opposite.
seasonal too. I mean, looking at the other one, right, those months and could be a
Yeah,
seasonality thing.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I was trying to figure that out.
We haven't seen that in Basalt. So if that is showing up in Parkdale, and I think that we need more than 3 months of data on the downtowner to really show that.
We won't start a shaming campaign yet.
But you might see that even with a full year's data, you might see that
Sure.
it mirrored
With the weather.
with the
Yeah.
weather and the.
Copy that.
And we'll see a little bit more of that on the Aspen slide.
Yeah, and you see that same decline when you
In
look
their
back at
placards.
2030 from August to
Absolutely.
October. That's on the black line.
It's a different Aspen.
Yeah, it's changing. Right.
Okay. So this is our Basalt Mid-Valley. And again, we can see that there seems to be a correlating increase in fixed route transit, microtransit, and bike share. And then this one, and I may ask you to explain the average daily trip portion to this, but this one, you can see that there are some dips that go down. Do you know why they touch down as low as they do for the bike share and
Season
microtransit?
The closure.
That's what I want to say it without being sure.
And then the same with the micro transit. Are they off seasons? No service, right?
Yeah, those are times that
May,
there was no service.
October, November.
That's right, yeah.
Let's go to the next one. Okay, so this one, you can kind of see there's a little bit more of a flat line or even certain decreases. Part of this has to do with the fact that the scale of Aspen program has been around it's been around for a lot longer and the scale is a lot bigger. But what we still can see is that when transit ridership rises, so does microtransit and bike share. So they still are showing a correlation that between microtransit, bike share, and fixed route services.
And that would probably be more, particularly the bike share would mirror microtransit without the seasonality closures.
Correct.
You have a line there, highway to Castle Creek Bridge counts, taken on a daily basis. It hovers around the 20,000 mark, right? I think our cap is 23,000 perhaps from 1996 levels. That is both ways. It is 10,000 in the morning, in 10,000 in the afternoon, right? That's both ways.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Lynn Rumbaugh is on here, so she'd be able to answer that for sure. Oh, she's-
Is Lynn on?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay. Yeah, you're correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Something to keep in mind here too is that on that line on Highway 82, in order to make the chart work, that is average daily trips on Highway 82. They're monthly trips on everything else.
Oh.
So if we did monthly trips on Castle Creek Bridge, everything would look like a flat line at the bottom. Just a scale thing to keep in mind with this different chart.
Okay, next slide. So some of the performance trend takeaways. One is that fixed transit is growing faster down valley than up valley, and bike share is growing faster than microtransit. First and last mile connectivity can support fixed transit, and there's possibly a correlation between fixed transit growth and the provision of first last mile mobility services. Microtransit does have inherent capacity limitations. So that is one thing that we are looking at, and we want to just continue getting more data to kind of help us answer some of these questions, particularly since microtransit is so new in Carbondale, and will be up and coming in Glenwood, and it's pretty new in Basalt as well. So we just feel like we need more data to be able to effectively make some conclusions.
And then the under growth, the two bullet points, fixed routes growing fastest.
Yeah,
So RAFTA ridership is growing
yeah,
faster than it's being fed by new users of microtransit and bike share. Is that what that's saying?
Saying that on a monthly basis, it's growing faster. In terms of total ridership.
Right, just meaning that the growth in RAFTA is beyond the bike share and the microtransit.
Yeah, if you look at it on a percentage basis, yes, bike share and microtransit are growing faster. If you look at it on a passenger basis, fixed route is still growing faster.
Okay. Thanks.
One question based on what Tori just said.
Yeah.
Go back. So if I remember in the past, when you talked about ridership, the hogback is growing. RAFTA's internal services are actually going down, or they're not coming up.
Contracted services or
Well,
internal?
when you said like, well, we'll show everything, the charts that have been shown. Hogback is going through the roof, regional service is going. But again, but the fixed routes in Aspen have not come back from pre-pandemic levels.
The local,
The local,
the local services in RAF or in.
but that's also a fixed route. That's a fixed route.
On a percentage basis, you're right. The hogback is growing the fastest, then the Carbondale circulator. But in terms, when you look at the scale of them, and the Carbondale circulator is serving, I believe, in the 20 to 30,000 range. 10,000. Carbondale, yeah, 10 to 15. And while the Aspen service is, we're hitting 160,000 just.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Well, that's a much more sophisticated, older system.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more money toward it. I was just trying to make the point that when we compare regional to local, we have to be careful what part of the region we're comparing.
Mhm.
And that, in my mind, what first class mobility has done is it's pointed out the lack of service down valley. I mean, Aspen's a great example on if you provide the service, it gets used. We haven't had the same or comparable services. So when we are looking at this first slide, in some ways, we're picking up the slack of that unmet need that we haven't been able to meet for a number of years, which is showing that Aspen, people are using it. It's you provided. So just when we talk about it's growing faster, well, it's growing pretty fast in cardio because we never had it. Local service has been really limited, so now we're all of a sudden booming. So I just wanted to be careful about those, what points or takeaways we make from the trend.
I would also clarify that Aspen isn't going down. It's still increasing. It's just at a slower rate.
Slower, it's coming back slow.
And I think that's one reason why David and I have identified that more data is needed and that we need to see some of these systems like the Carbondale Downtowner. We need to see that operate for a little bit longer before we can really make determinations. But that was an excellent point.
It's also worth noting that Glenwood doesn't have, all we have right now is Ride Glenwood. And so, yeah, that is growing. We haven't implemented any other microtransit or ride share yet. And we also have really identified some areas that are like underserved in our community that can't really fully utilize the infrastructure that's already existing. So I think we're going to see an exponential increase as soon as we get those things online.
We hope.
Yeah, I think so. Just from, speaking from, I live in one of those neighborhoods that has no transportation,
Yeah.
other than like your car or your own
Yeah.
feet. And so I think that, just from the feedback I've gotten, it's anticipated.
Mirta has a question.
Thank you. Quick question on the Aspen chart, right? We have the Capitol Creek Bridge counter. Are there other types of counters throughout the region that have Highway 82 counting that can be reflected on the chart?
There are, it was on the previous charts for Gulf. It wasn't on this one that was presented. It's in your packet. So we use the snow mass counter, which isn't exactly there, but it's the closest one. So we have that counter, and then there's another continuous CDOT counter in South Glenwood that was on the Glenwood chart.
And those charts, those columns are provided by CDOT. And they have continuous count meters that are like counting traffic all the time. And then they have short duration ones, and we use the continuous count ones and the two that David mentioned. In the two continuous count meters that are in our region at the moment.
Thank you.
Next slide. So in order to meet the current mile mobility reserve fund projection, we had to use certain metrics to forecast for the funding. And so we made some assumptions, and this paints the picture of those assumptions that we made. So the recapitalization, we assume that no funds would be added to the revenue through 2029, or sorry, to the reserve through 2029. We are keeping the current guidelines for the grant and maintaining those guidelines. The rapid bike share obligations. So we have predicted and known bike share expenses, and we considered those. The available future FLMM grant funds to maintain rapid bike share obligations as outlined in the MOU SOA through 2028. Future remaining FLMM funds would be divided equally from 2026 to 2029 annually. And then award projections are rough and based on currently known information. So if award projections were to change, that might change that fund projection. Are there any questions on the slide? Because I found this one. Maybe there could be some questions with this.
We just lived through this whole thing recently, so I think we're all still nightmaring over it.
No, but I think those are good assumptions to model,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Assume there's no more funding and assume we operate business
Yep.
as usual. What happens?
Okay, next slide. So this chart essentially kind of explains a little bit further of what I was saying. And that is that how the fund balance will decrease according to the variables of the bike share obligations currently in place, and then current and projected awards for both microtransit and bike share. And so and you can just note that 2025 is our largest award year, and that it will decrease from there. Next slide. So this chart just shows the operating cost per passenger per trip to and from a transit stop. So we use this example of the Basalt Connect. That is a $36.78 cost per passenger per trip, whereas Recycle is $9 per passenger per trip from the transit stop to and from, and then a fixed route operating cost direct of $11.25. So looking at this, it shows that bike share appears to be the most cost effective. However, this chart does not take into account benefits like in-town connectivity, reduced congestion, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and community costs associated with decreased air quality, reduced parking demand, customer choice, and reduced economic costs to customers. In other words, there's some costs that aren't accounted for.
And can you just tell me the difference on the Basalt Connect between the $14.89 and the $36 number?
The $14.89, that is essentially taking the total cost of the service divided by the total number of trips. So passengers on service in 2023. These are all 2023 costs. The $36, that is if you break out just the number of trips that went to transit stops divided by how much money we have to put into the service. So that's how much it costs us per trip that connected to a transit stop.
Okay, but good to know that the per trip cost isn't as, I was thinking the per trip cost overall of microtransit was in that $30 range.
The total cost is on the left side.
14 is
Yeah.
much more reasonable.
And for all the,
Oh,
that 14.89, is the cost for all those other benefits that we mentioned before, like, less congestion, less air pollution, et cetera. And that's kind of the cost per person for all the benefits, not just one subset.
I get over comment. Okay, so to tag on to your comment, that $14.89 is the total cost to actually deliver the entire program, right? Divided by the total rides or trips. For the middle column, it's how much RAPTA is actually putting. Yeah, I just want to make sure that people understand the distinction.
And I think like one way that this discussion may go, that once we get there, the proposal to have RAPTAs pay for trips to and from parking. And that would be a different number than that $36, because right now RAPTA's contributing 50%, but only 25% or whatever are going to the parking rides. So you're sort of paying double compared to what you're measuring as far as the trips that are accounted to, could be accounted for RAPTA. So.
Do we have information? I know Recycle has had this like length of that average length of trip, time, and also distance. Do we have something like that for?
Yes, absolutely.
It's kind of interesting. Because part of the cost is way more stops for microtransit. You're stopping way more often than RAPTA, but just for stopping. Just curious.
Yeah, we receive reports from the downtowner and also from the jurisdictions using the downtowner. And those reports have several, probably 20 different metrics on it. And we're actually working with the downtowner to get even better metrics so that we can get more accurate counts and get more accurate information. And,
Special delivery.
Just stop right over the door. Are there any microphones?
Bailey. Okay, everybody, get up and do some jumping jacks.
Okay, I'm gonna give us a time check. It is 10 o'clock. I know we have a few more slides. This is all super helpful.
Yeah.
Let's keep going with the funding scenarios and then we can get into the meat.
Okay. So this slide.
Great.
So this slide is just a quick review of the options that. And this is my very brief description of them that I'm gonna give, and David can speak more at length. But option A is continue at status quo. And that current funding will be adequate through 2029 based on those projections. Option B would be to prioritize funding, and those first four things in option B are the priorities. With the assumption that Raptor will provide a steady level of funding long-term. This funding structure would likely be feasible through 2028. Option C, more gradual tapering of funds that allows jurisdictions to, quote, right size their microtransit and find additional funding. This scenario also supports new bike share applications, whereas scenario B would not. Raptor's liability reduces from over 1 million in 2025 to 525,000 by 2029. And then option D, alternative funding would need to be at 500,000 per year to support the Basalt, Carbondale, and Glenwood microtransit. And then just note that we have developed KPI to distribute funding when limited. So one example of a key performance indicator might be to understand and I think, Ben, you alluded to this, might be to understand the percentage of connections FLMM programs provide to fixed routes and base a future funding structure off of that.
We're a little bit over time here, so just to get through to the final part here if possible. Just one thing to note is that option B and C, so you saw these as a part of the last presentation. Something did express at the last go around that B does imply that we have long-term funding, which was part of the reason why we didn't recommend it. Well, option C does bring it down to 0 over time because it buys us time to evaluate, get more data. If we're not dropping the jurisdictions off full turkey with the end of funding at the end of 3 years, and allows RFTA time to further evaluate other options for long-term funding over the next few years. So that was part of the reason why we recommended option C. And this was the slide that you saw as part of the previous staff recommendation. So it was option C would be our grant program. The tapered funding at 10% per year after 3 years. So that was 50% for the first 3 years, then dropping to 40, 30, 20. While developing a KPI, we have limited funds. And on the RFTA side, continuing to look for long-term funding sources through that time period and then coming back to the board. But for the rest of this conversation, this is the slide I really wanted to get to. I think there are a number of different steps in this conversation that would be very helpful for us in order to proceed, and I think that could be helpful for you. We might have already gone past some of these questions, but I'll walk through them real quick. So the first question I think is important to answer is, do we want to continue with the FLMM grant program in its entirety at all? So we're several years in now. So the current program, you may recall, it's a seed funding program. So 50% for 3 years for operations and 50% for infrastructure. It has been pretty successful to date so far. The second question is capital versus operating. And I think this is a kind of a perennial question for lots of funds where this isn't predetermined, particularly grant programs, is do we want to have that program funding for funding long-term operating, which does burden the program long-term, but then can provide stability for certain programs, or do we want it to focus on infrastructure costs that are one-time costs? The third question here is the time frame for operating. So say the board does want to continue with operating past 3 years. Do we want to allow operating to go past that 3 years? And if so, are there exceptions for that? So I think that what we've knocked around so far is microtransit could be one of those exceptions that would go past the 3 years. And then finally, and this goes back to some of the first slides with the IGA, is that defining that regional versus local cost allocation. And so if the answer is yes to all of the previous 3 questions, then what does that cost allocation look like between regional versus local? So what is RFTA's obligation and what is local obligation, and where and how do we draw that line? I think is the final question. If we could get up to that point, that would be pretty amazing from my perspective. So anyway, this is where I want to leave it.
Great. Thanks, David and Mary, for that presentation, and lots of questions from the full team here as we've gone. We have a good kind of platform to start from. So it seems like we should just dive in with that first question then. I mean, maybe clarify that a little bit for me. Should we continue with our current program? I mean, looking at the doomsday graph here, like feasible, but my gut is to say, yes, we should continue with the current program. It's been wildly successful. I mean, there's no way that a lot of our jurisdictions would have gotten these programs up and running without RFTA's support. And I think you guys up Valley led the way, and you did some stuff on your own. You know, you did recycle on your own, you did downtown on your own, and then we looked at it and said, we want to do that too. And so I think it's been a huge success, contributed to the regional for people on transit. And I think, you know, if we had somebody from Newcastle here who hasn't gotten into this yet, and Glenwood's just getting started, it doesn't really seem fair as a regional entity to say, well, those of us who got there first, you know, got a piece of the pie and we ate it. So, but like, can we say yes to number 1 with this scenario here?
Well, I think something that's important to remember with that is that anticipates zero recapitalization of the fund.
Okay.
My hope, more or less fingers crossed, is that we would have some surplus at a certain point that would recapitalize the fund to a certain extent.
Could we have Mike to explain sort of how, when this program is created, which the program is a great idea, the funding of it was just not very sustainable, right? And if you could explain how that worked.
Yeah. So really, during the pandemic, right, RFTA was able to, there was a lot of federal stimulus money, federal money to help with the recovery from COVID and all that stuff. And at that time, a lot of jurisdictions weren't sure how the sales taxes would perform. So RFTA was able to benefit through these programs to help pay for our operating expenses. It gave us the confidence that we could pay our workers knowing that service will eventually come back, right? And so during that time, while we operated more bus service and with less capacity, we were able to benefit from receiving all these federal funds. At the same time, sales tax didn't drop like 50% like people feared, and it actually went up. So during that time, RFTA was able to accumulate local sales tax dollars and build up its reserves. I think to a point where we were almost like $100 million. And so I think during that time, because RFTA had a healthy reserve, like fund balance, we were able to, it coincided with the whole, I think the Basalt Connect program was one of the initial programs. So we did carve out some of those funds for seed money, right? But since then, you know, our ability to replenish those funds, the reserve, is really contingent on RFTA's overall financial picture. Are we having a surplus every year? I know that we were just working on our 25 budget and we're using fund balance. This 2024, we were using fund balance because we have large capital projects that we're using, we're funding. So in 24 and 25, we don't anticipate to fund it. So I think that the program will replenish its reserve funds so long as RFTA, either it's in between years where we're not doing a big capital project, but as you know, RFTA is capital intensive. So it's harder to predict what that continual funding stream might look like. That's why, from a conservative standpoint, it's fair to say, let's just not assume any right now. So that's the challenge. So that's how we got to where we are. I don't know if that helps.
Right. Yeah, no, the plan to replenish the fund was being surplus. And as we know, we can't always predict that there'll be surplus, right?
That's why the original idea was using, how do we take those funds and I think that's why it was tied to this whole seed funding, because it's a one-time aspect. It was hard to promise a recurring funding source. So that's the tie of why we went with the funding.
Thanks for that. I think that's important to point out is that philosophically, the program is built around being a seed funding program and being that one time, maybe up to 3 years of funding available type pot of money, as opposed to that long-term funding source.
So we could decide as RFTA board to change that funding mechanism and allocate funds annually to first and last mile. We just haven't done that. We'd have to compete with all of RFTA's other priorities. Right?
Yeah, I think that's the two scenarios. We'd need to do less of something
Yeah.
that we're currently doing to redirect those funds, or we find new funding.
Well, it ought to be really, just to be clear about how much this is costing. Right, it's $2.5 to $3 million
I think that's just.
total.
So right now,
Including new-
well, in 20, you're talking about microtransit.
Yeah, I mean, Rapid's got a $70 million annual operating budget. It's a $2 to $3 million project, not insignificant, but not a lot, for a lot of benefit. And the neat thing about it right now is it's leveraging the things to get money in the local community as well. Many who don't have dedicated funding sources, or we give our 1% to RFTA. So just trying to put this in context of what we're actually trying to do and also what it costs and what are the various options. And for Ben's point, there might be interim steps so we can take the buy the program more time. Local governments could, like Carbondale, go and ask their voters. That could take a little time to figure out how that works. I don't even know if that would pass because we already give penny or 1% to RFTA. So my sense is, how do we keep it going the way it is? What's the funding mechanism that spreads it so that a new council can come on? One would can fully see what this does for them, and the folks not retaining all of a sudden going to 10% match. So, I mean, I think that's what we're grappling with. Is it's a really useful program. We don't have enough funding for it. How do we get the funding and how much do we need? And do we need it all at once? Can we get bits of it so we can keep building the pool so it can keep being useful?
And on that funding piece, the total cost, I pulled this up. So this is the cost of Glenwood, can't get my cursor. The cost of all three microtransit right now is, it's all Carbondale, Glenwood is that blue line. So in 2025, that's a little over $2 million. That's total cost for RFTA and local jurisdiction. So that's total cost of all three of those programs. And then the increase, I just put a 5% inflation on it. So if we wanted to maintain our current level of contribution, we would need to, that should be $1 million a year in 2025. If we wanted to go with, say, the option B that was provided there, that's down to $500,000 per year that we need to identify. So I think there's different levels of engagement that we could be looking at, but right now we're at 50% level.
If I could add,
that what could change those numbers is Newcastle. If Newcastle were to come in and have similar programs. I think the other wild card is possibly Aspen. Aspen has done a lot of these things on their own over the years. The question could be raised, would they be eligible for some of this benefit as well?
I would add snowmass into that. mix.
And snowmass.
We'll hear from other board members. Greg, Tori, Aaron, any thoughts on kind of the first big question? Like, do we want to try to figure out a way to maintain the startup source of funds for bike share and microchip?
So, yeah, I'll start. I'm sitting here and I'm like making notes and the short answer is yes. And mainly, from a semi-selfish position, we haven't even began to like explore what the benefits to that could be or even get the program going. And I would hate to see it like lose its momentum before it even gets started. And I really truly think that if we are going to take a bite out of the congestion and some of the other problems that we're facing, I think that we have to really take away the barriers to using kind of our transportation options. And I think that this local transportation piece is really vital to that. So, I like the idea of either, I don't know, maybe like a phased thing where we keep the funding going, but maybe not until 2029. Maybe we transition into like after a certain period of time so that we can start to really explore the options without draining the coffers that wrap them. And I don't know if that's an option to kind of, have it a little bit more gradual. And I'm also really curious to understand more how Aspen has funded, because like you said, you've done a lot of these programs on your own. I used to live up Valley. I never had a car. I had a car for a while. I left it in the driveway. And so I'm just curious, maybe what some of our, like, Glenwood can learn from Aspen. I know we live in a totally different income bracket demographic, but it would be interesting to even know kind of what we can reflect.
Well, just to answer that real quickly, and Lynn can maybe get more specific, but we have dedicated taxes.
Right.
We give a percentage to our transit. And then we have our paid parking program. So I don't know what percentage each plays into it, but I think those are our two biggest levers. You were there.
Parking's a big deal because Aspen charges so much money for parking that the revenue is gigantic.
And I know that's a big push. We're facing barriers from our business community. We'll have to see if we can do that, but even anything that we can get from you, I'm sure you've probably already shared it, but just, how that has enhanced and not hurt the businesses. I think that those are, kind of just more information.
What level is do you know what your sales tax total is?
So we just increased it, like volume, like or percentage.
9 point what?
We are now going to be at, we just did another, so it'll be, I think, for 8.6. And so it'll be 8.7.
Okay, so for me, the first thing that I would look at for Glenwood Springs as an entity would be a small sales tax increase. And the reason I would jump to that is because the goal of it is to enhance business. You're talking about mobility in Glenwood. You're talking about getting people to where businesses are. And so a lot of times, so that might be one of the more palatable solutions for you.
We passed this one that we just did by 65 votes. So.
Well, I hear that. You definitely have a greater sensitivity to that. For the city of Aspen, we've always looked at 10% as our ceiling. We think that once you eclipse that people start to go, what the F? But we've pushed it all the way up to that. I think we're currently at like 9.8 or something, But anyway, if you had room there, I would say that would probably be a good opportunity. Our one of our tax streams, I believe, that is a percentage of our lodging tax goes to our transit. Yeah. I don't want to talk too much about that because taxation is a very difficult proposition and it relies completely on the voters and stuff. So
I think we have an opportunity when that TIF sunsets out in the meadows to kind of like, since people are kind of already paying that, maybe we can kind of Play that.
Yeah, and the development pattern for Glenwood Springs gives you some other opportunities where you're opening up definite economic centers, and moving people to and from those is very important to those businesses.
Yeah.
So,
Corey, what's your thought on that first question? And then I see David Knight has his hand raised online. But
well, yes, I want to continue it. I have a lot of questions though. And so, for me, remember when we were getting this together, I was like, hey, is it possible to get a service map? Right, because what I've always said about RAFTA and ridership is, who are we trying to bring to ridership? Like, number one is to identify what we're talking about. And we're not just talking about mobility here, but we're talking about RAFTA's role in mobility, right? So for me, I need to see a service map to understand who can we possibly bring onto ridership. Today, not the most fun day to drive from Aspen to Carbondale, but always a learning experience. And I'll tell you what I saw again today. I mean, honestly, I don't think my radio was on. I think my mouth was just open the entire drive at looking at what's going on the Up Valley side. And I'm just thinking as I'm driving down here, I'm thinking, who are in these cars right now that would be so much happier on these RAFTA buses right now? Then I got another mile down the road and I realized that where there is no dedicated bus lane, those buses. So coming into here, for me to get into this, the first thing here's my questions: rider data. So do we run a rider poll? Like, do we have a questionnaire that goes to riders that's available to them at all times? Do we have rider data? And then on the other side of that, do we have non-rider information? Have we launched a campaign that goes to seek people and understand their barriers? I know that we've said for a long time, it's convenience and time is number one. Cost is even second to that, right? Because our fares are pretty reasonable and decent for the transit. And if you match them up against your personal vehicle or what have you, we think that they stack up pretty well. So what we've seen is convenience, but non-rider info, who is out there that wants to ride the bus that doesn't now? And that's why I volunteered for this committee, is because I really think that connectivity is a large barrier. So travel time data, I was going to ask, so for example, do you guys know every single bus? Do you know when they hit what points and stuff like that? So today would be interesting. Like I said, the roundabout and the entrance to Aspen wasn't congested. It was congested 2 or 3 points down the road, and there was one that was a vehicle off the side of the road, right? And so that was one place that there's no dedicated bus line. So I was just interested, what's our travel time data? How do we share that with people that on the bad days, this is your best option? Again, I come back to a map. I'd love to see service areas, and that goes for like where We Cycle is operating, where the circulators are operating, and get us. And I think we should all have kind of that understanding. You know, I was gonna say, I'm glad that you accepted chairing this. Thank you. And I'm glad that Colin, you're second chair here and stuff, because I think that Carbondale is such a great place for us to think globally. What you guys experience in Carbondale with the housing and development pattern that you have, your central core of businesses, but the fact that you are mid-valley and service, and your residents service both ends. I think it's great that you guys are here, because I think that what we learned from you kind of applies a lot of other places. Not everything you're going to learn from Aspen is going to apply to other places. I had a question about the basalt graph on that circulator in basalt. With seasonal service shutdowns, do we feel like that is impacting rider numbers? One of the things that we see in Aspen is that if it's not a consistency of routine, people will not use it when they can and then not when they can't. They will go to whatever their solution is for when they cannot use it. Revenue growth is my next question. The opportunities between fares, or meaning that there is a portion paid by the users, grants that may be out there, and then tax/public funds. Absolutely, that's the question we're on. But for me to go, how do we allocate that, or what's an appropriate capital program here? I have these other questions that I don't, so that would inform me about what could be effective.
Okay.
And then the last question I had here is, like I said, who are we trying to bring to ridership? What's our opportunity for bringing those people to ridership? So that's the long answer. The short answer is yes.
Thanks. Steph, any of you want to respond to any of those questions? I mean, I think especially we had some questions about how do we gather data, and do we know like kind of who we're trying to reach and who our riders are, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so the map is on our website. If you go to System Map, it is an interactive map. You can see the whole system, all the stops for our whole service area. The one thing we do not have on here though are like bike share stations or what communities provide microtransit. So that's something that we could consider adding to this map.
Yeah. And you know, if I'm really saying it for me, I mean, this is, I'm very visual, I think, you know, in graphic content. And so I'll tell you, our first problem is, man, we serve a big area.
70 miles.
Problem solved, I get it. But anyway, this is super helpful. But then that microtransit and that bike share, because those are our FLMM operators right now, it'd be interesting to see where we are not serving. Just having you at this table and understanding that Glenwood is in a position of real connectivity need. And I've experienced it. I was down in Glenwood and had to get from Grand Avenue over to the
rec center, right? I remember it was a meeting there.
Yeah, there was a meeting.
You were telling me, you're like, I got off the bus and I've been walking.
And
Yeah.
it was something else. And
Maybe some system.
you know, and again, I mean, I didn't mind it. I just was late.
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying, and I don't think, and Glenwood is interesting because I mean, Grand Avenue and I-70, Glenwood is built off of some main arteries, and yet everything that's around is not really connected.
No.
And so,
Even internally, we're not connected. I mean,
Right.
it really is. And there's no alternate. If I need to get to South Glenwood or to West Glenwood from South Glenwood, I have two options: Grand Avenue or Midland, period.
Yeah.
There's not any other workaround. There's not any other. So, you know.
Bisected by two rivers, two highways.
Yeah. I mean, it is. And so that's why I was like super excited. You know, I've raised two kids there and I had to drive them all over the place. You know, we tried to give them buses or bikes and tried to get them, you know, if you go up skiing, I would drive them over to 27th Street to take the skier bus. But, you know, other than that, I've always been in my car with them.
So, Steph, any comments on the survey kind of data?
So we do conduct what we call an onboard survey every 3 years. We're scheduled to do one this March, so we'll have new data here in a few months. We haven't done a community survey in terms of people who don't ride transit. That's something we've talked about doing. It hasn't risen to something that we've actually pulled the trigger on, but it's a great opportunity to kind of learn why you're not riding transit and what could be done to change that. So, but we will have that fresh data. We do, our last survey was during the pandemic. Yeah, we were scheduled to do it March of 2020, and then we said that's not going to work. So we pulled the plug. And I think we did do one though in 22 maybe. Yeah. So we do have some data in regards to that.
I would add that the data that we do have from the 2022 survey, it doesn't break out bike share or microtransit. So it asks about biking or walking, but we don't know outside that, how people are getting to the.
Will that be added to this year's?
That's something that we're
We
gonna.
can.
Yeah, that'd be important. Okay, I want to get to David Knight online. He's been patiently keeping his hand raised for.
It's all good. We got to work through all this stuff, so all good. No, I think we need to at least continue with what we're doing here. You need that 3 years to get a service rolling and get that data and figure out, what you're going to do. Like I know we need to do more, and that's one of the reasons I'm really enthusiastic about this whole process. I think there is more we can do. And as far as like what more we can do, I think one thing we need to make sure we keep on the radar is, Tori mentioned, what ridership are we trying to reach? We get letters all the time, or emails mainly from Holland Hills people and Elgin people who are outside town limits, but in the service area that we, for all other practical purposes that we should be trying to get, who are not able to get microtransit, who could be more riders, right? Who can't get it because they're not in town limits. So I think that's something we definitely need to make sure we keep on our kind of in our view here of what we're doing and why and who we're trying to reach.
Thanks, David. Greg, any thoughts on that first question? Yeah, I would say I definitely want to. I think we would all definitely want to continue it. I'm listening to the questions, great questions from Tori, comments from David. It's all good. I'm thinking about your situation, which is an extended thing. So, you have the luxury of lots of parking spaces for people, yet you need to figure out how to get them out of their cars. It's so easy to get in your car. My thoughts on this were, we've been doing this long enough now, and the Upper Valley as a model for the Lower Valley makes perfect sense. We should all be watching and learning. What efficiencies could we possibly look for in what we've already created? Are there any efficiencies that might help us? I do really appreciate other possible funding streams we could look for, but then also other incentives or carrots or sticks that the governments could think about. Like, how do we get all these individual contractors out of their trucks? If they're all going to work on one job site for a month, why can't we, put it in the building permit that you keep your tools on site and you take the damn bus or the employee van? Have we tried that? And is it practical? I don't know, but I'm trying to think. It might be we've got to come up with ways to really encourage people out of their cars, beyond the cost thing. I think if you for tax purposes, what is it, 55 cents a mile now for use of your car? Or is it probably higher? So that's 40 or 50 bucks a day that you're losing if you're driving your own car from Glenwood to Aspen to work, compared to $7 or $8 for the bus. So what I'm just wondering is, are there other income sources we could consider, and are there efficiencies? Like, I'm always thinking about this transit system. I like to think of a universal, I'd like RFTA to be the universal transit system, and I'd like every first last mile solution to be part of the RFTA umbrella. So you could have it under one app. You could go online and say, I need to get from here to there. I don't know if it's going to be a car, a bicycle, or a bus, but it's all available on one, in one place. And I'm just wondering, would that efficiency help us get to the point where, one, we can justify it to our ridership, that perhaps people, after a few years of getting it for free or cheap, might be willing to pay a little bit. Not unreasonable to, as much as I love the idea of free bus fare up and down the valley, maybe that's not practical yet. I'm just thinking out loud, but I'm throwing ideas out. But so I love the idea. I want to continue. I want to use what we've learned so far to see if we can come up with efficiencies. I wanted to ask, how much is the gas you guys are buying when you could be running electric vehicles, if the cost of an electric vehicle came down enough to justify buying one?
Problem, we can do electric vehicles. The problem is that a town, as they're doing 70 miles, would need another van, because at this stage, an EV in cold weather won't last all day.
Right.
So then Carbondale, instead of having two, would have to have three. The cost goes up.
Charging on both ends, whatever, something like that. Yeah. So,
but we are going to bring in just, some EV, the new Volkswagen, and test it, the Volkswagen bus.
Yeah.
Cause rumor has it that can get almost 500 miles. Then that would work.
I think we're gonna see. So anyway, we'll look great that you're looking at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
I think that's it for now.
Don, I'm assuming you're on board with question one. We want to continue. Okay, I think we hit all board members. Did I miss anybody? Let's move on then to kind of question number 2, the capital versus operating, which was if the board wishes to continue with the first class mile mobility grant program, we just said we do. We want to fund capital only, which is a one-time expense. Or do you want to continue to fund capital and operating requests, which currently we do for 3 years? In my mind, the ultimate goal would be that, at least from Carbondale's perspective, that the operating continues for the portion of trips that are to and from a transit stop. That's part of the regional service. But like if 25% of our micro transit is dropping off at the park and ride, that RAFTA is funding 25% of that service long term. The other part, I do feel like that's like Aspen's running a local service, Snowmaps, everybody's running a local service. That's then up to us to figure out how much of that do we want to do. And I think there's ways to incentivize that, say, to downtowner. I mean, you guys have very sophisticated technology. We could say, you're prioritizing trips to and from the park and ride. Everybody else has to wait longer, or you have to pay if you're not going to and from the park and ride. I mean, some people are using it to, 12-year-olds getting to their friend's play date across town. Like, that's all well and good, but I don't feel like that's RAPT's responsibility. So that's my thinking, is that the operating requests I'd like to see continue, but I'd like to see it be focused on not just a number we pull out of the sky, but that data. I don't know if you feel the same. We haven't really talked, but that's, no, I'm okay with that. I think, so one of the things, being from a small town, I always think of capacity. And one of the interesting dynamics in First Last Mile is we cycle has significant capital needs. Microtransit didn't. Partially because of the way we set it up. They're a separate contact, or we see them as community partners. So I wonder about that dynamic. We Rapids work specifically with recycle bike share, but we're not working with downtown on, and I get it's different, non-profit, for profit, but I think there might be some opportunities there. And just the capacity of RAPTA getting capital grants that you've been out, that it's a lot harder for a small community like Basalt or Carbondale to get. We just don't have staff. So I think it's a little bit nuanced. It's not yes, no, it's gray. Both are needed, especially for a town the size of Carbondale. I'd love to see us just find ways, how do we get it funded? How is there a partnership between RAPTA and the local communities to keep this going? Because I think we've tapped something that is, we haven't fully, seen how high it can go. And the fact that it's still climbing, we want to figure out how we get the plan to keep it going. Just like with RAPTA, we want RAPTA to keep getting bigger. This is part of that. So, I agree with Ben, but I'd love to see us ways to partner on the capital side, because small communities, Newcastle, Salt, Carbondale are going to be able to participate.
Other thoughts on this one? Is it capital only, or is it capital plus operating?
To your point too, I'm thinking specifically of Newcastle, like they aren't gonna have much in sales tax. They don't have much retail, they don't have much revenue. So unless they could get like some kickback from Garfield counties or probably, like you really are hitting on something I think is pretty sensitive, is that the funding options for communities are really slim.
And I mean, that gets into, I think, what's always been a really challenging topic to even discuss at RAFTA meetings, which is there a point at which we, as RAFTA, treat member jurisdictions differently based on the size of their budget? So far, we haven't, right? Like, Up Valley communities have gone out ahead and just done things without coming to RAFTA because you could. And then we're like, please, RAFTA, help us do that thing. But that is a reality. And I think Newcastle's an even more extreme. We think about Carbondale, like we're passing our budget tomorrow night. It's a $13 million general fund. So you all know what your budgets are right now
Right.
because you're in that process. Those are the numbers that we're working with. That's everything. That's our police, that's our, that's the whole thing. And so, a $500,000 annual expense to us is really different than it is to a municipality with 10 or 20x general fund. And then Newcastle's gonna be, I don't know what they are, but I would imagine they're significantly, smaller than that. But it helps us all if their folks get on the bus, right?
Yeah, because pretty much all their folks are working elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
So they're servicing our communities, and so it makes sense for us to support that as, better funded communities, and yet there's a limited budget there. So I think that that's something that we should just be really sensitive to. I have no solution to it. It's just something I'm aware of.
David, you want to jump in on this one? It looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think operating expense is the crux of it. And I honestly, for Basalt at least, and this is for Recycle and Connect, is there even any capital that we spend? I think it's all operationalized. It's as a service, both of those services. So I'm not even sure how much. I was trying to think, what are we spending capital on? Because we just pay Downtowner basically for like paying for what we plan to use or whatever, the subscription fee.
Yeah, I think that was kind of Colin's thought as well. I mean, I don't know, Mitch, if you have any input on that. Like, if we decided to break this out somehow, would Downtowner have a way to break out capital versus operating? or not?
Absolutely. We work with some, we're in over 25 locations. We have some locations that buy the vehicles and then we do everything else. So, because you can get grants to buy vehicles. So they buy the vehicles, we do it, and then we just deduct that from the price. So would answer their question that would cut your price quite a bit because these vans are expensive.
And for a little bit more context to this question, so this is thinking about the FLMM grant program as a whole. So we receive grants for all kinds of different things. So part of it, a lot of it's infrastructure. Specifically, we're building like Big Street in Glenwood receives funds. Blake Street in Glenwood received funds. So those were construction projects that were partially funded from this. From our perspective, when we receive an invoice, say from Carbondale or Carbondale Downtowner, we consider that operating expense. Even though there are capital expenses built into that, that's an ongoing agreement, so we consider that operating.
But we could break it out. We haven't. So.
Yeah, operating's the issue though, because that's like, we can always, not always, but it's easier sometimes to say, oh, we have this pot of money or we can go do this, but to sustain it year over year is always like, that's where, because once you start a service, it's hard to take it back, and you got to make sure that you have a way to fund that longer term. Otherwise it's messy. So I think, just that, do we want to continue to fund capital and operating? We're going to have to, unless we relieve operating requests to the extent that, they're where they are now for these pilot programs, basically. That would be my thought.
Other thoughts on this one?
We want to have the option to do both. We want to keep doing both. Thinking back to something David said earlier, like we get requests from people who'd love it if we had transit service from, not for me. I don't think it's for me. Transit service from far-flung places, it just isn't feasible. So maybe we need to just plan on not trying to satisfy everybody, but go for the sweet spots where we have got the most riders, and then work on the reliable service. As Tori says, if the service is reliable, people use it. If it's not reliable, they give up very quickly, right? I want to know about the rest of the world. People are using Uber, Lyft, and Waymo elsewhere, but they don't seem to use it here. Why are we doing something for people when they could be using other rideshare services could we incentivize them to join us, and maybe even integrate into our app somehow? Maybe they already are. so that they become possibilities? And could we even consider, would a subsidy to them be cheaper than trying to do it all ourselves? Could we do that at a lower rate than our own cost? Let me keep going. I'm going to keep asking questions, but I want to get a list of them, but I want to get them out. Can business partners help fund local employees' transit to a greater extent? And how can we incentivize that? And then finally, I talked about scaling to be efficient. And perhaps that's a way of working on those operating expenses, bringing them down. Scaling with ubiquity of one type of vehicle that serves everywhere, as well as one app under one umbrella. And then, are there any other income streams that we haven't really gone after? Philanthropy, corporate transport, corporate sponsorships that we might be able to reach out to. Have we turned over all those rocks? Thanks. Sorry for all that, but.
Okay, I mean, maybe just on the Uber, Lyft.
Yeah. So that is a model that a lot of transit systems have gone to, because trying to recreate that type of a service within a public entity is challenging.
Beautiful.
So what a lot of agencies have done is established relationships with Uber, Lyft type partners, and they will help fund those rides. Challenge here in this region is there's just not enough demand to warrant
Keep them here.
for anybody to make
get
a
help.
profit. So they would need some type of subsidy
Right.
to make it worthwhile to operate those services. But they do have programs in a lot of communities across the nation where transit agencies will fund. They'll have an agreement in place with an Uber or Lyft, which then the passenger can have like a coupon or redeem a code when they're booking their trip. They put that in and it discounts the ride. So there are programs out there like that.
There, just on that note, there is a new co-op based ride sharing program, ride hailing program started in the state. It's owner operated and they're growing within the state. We'll see how well they do, but they're certainly trying to expand up into our valley. And it's local owner operators. And I'm just thinking, well, what's my retirement plan? Maybe I'll if I get the car I want, then I can pay for it by running hacking, I don't know. I'm looking at all of my options, Mike. I don't know.
Dan.
Yeah, Dan, see what Dan's doing. And I'm just wondering if we should just keep that on the radar. Because how do we incentivize some local people to, hey, get into rideshare? No, it's not a full-time job, but it might be some part-time cash to help you buy your lattes,
What's the name of the company that's starting in Colorado? Do you know?
I'll find it for you and let you know.
Tori, any thoughts on this question too?
Yeah. Yes, we need to keep our options open. I like kind of how you were parsing that out. That sounded as a good starting point. If we had more money, we'd do more.
Right. Yeah, when I think of like a spectrum of RFTA takes care of all the first and last mile stuff on one end of the spectrum, to RFTA doesn't do any of it, to right in the middle, right now, it's like we do it 50-50. It seems like there's a shift over toward that, doing a little less. That's RFTA does the part that's serving the RFTA trunk line. That makes sense to me. I understand we don't have funding to do that right now. That's a goal that I would like to aim toward. One, just while we're on this capital versus operating, another thought I've had is I like the prioritization that we've put in place for now, I think with option C, right? Where it's first is RFTA's bike share MOU obligations. Second is a request for bike share support. Third is request for microtransit. And fourth is request for all over the project. I would like us to consider striking number 4 going into 2026, all other projects, the infrastructure, like that's where those are really big costs. And that's, to me, the clearest, like historically, it's fallen in local jurisdictions to upgrade our bike and pedestrian networks. It's super expensive. I mean, 27th Street underpass is an incredible project that RFTA headed up and got all the grants, but holy cow, $20 million later, right? And so it just shows like how deep those projects can be. I feel like we should prioritize just the upstart and operation of bike share and microtransit, but I'd love to hear what others think about that. I was kind of surprised actually that the first class mile mobility fund ever went toward like helping build bike lanes. Like, it's nice. I'd love it. We could build tons of extra bike lanes and sidewalks and all that. But I feel like that's just something that each municipality is used to doing on their own.
So I'll speak to Glenwood because
Yeah.
I know that's why we have held off on bringing recycle or bike share into there. Is just because we don't have actually the dedicated infrastructure. It's not safe. I'm picturing a tourist coming to town, getting on recycle and trying to like cruise Grand Avenue, you know, and we don't even have the outlet. Like, so that's part of like this, you know, extra street tax we just did. That's part of all, like, we know we're coming from behind trying to catch up, but those are the challenges. And so to get there in any purposeful way, having this be available to that point as well, I think allows us to get there. Otherwise, maybe Glenwood never would get into this first last mile category. So, you know, each community is different. I think that's really what we have to recognize is like everybody has their own specific challenges. We have the highway going right down the middle of our town, so that presents its own unique.
So we did bring this chart up. That top yellow orange color is what's currently going towards and what we're anticipating going towards that infrastructure.
Okay, for years 26 through 29, that simply took whatever was remaining in 29 and broke that out evenly. So that you can think of that as just being the remainder. So that may or may not be spent. It's certainly not obligated.
And 25 is currently programmed. Yeah. So those have been grants that have been awarded.
Well, given how tight our funding is, I back suggestion that the focus is on first last mile, bike share and micro transit, and larger infrastructure road related things wouldn't be, you know, for now, okay, but going forward, I don't think that's really a great thing to obligate the program to do. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but I think if we're looking ways to cut some of RAFTA's obligations, that would be an obvious one to think about.
And currently, those grants have gone toward bike lane, sidewalk, trailing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That all makes sense. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of whether we can afford it.
Yeah.
David, you want to jump in there, David Knight?
Yeah, I heard a couple things that really perked my ears. What Colin just said about basically, you know, the bike lanes and stuff like that. I mean, that's the kind of thing, the capital expense that we do have. They have post funds where we have some projects for connectivity within Basalt that we're actively working on, and those are like right in our wheelhouse. It's the other stuff that like, you know, like we said before. Greg mentioned rideshare, and I think that's something we have to keep on our radar as far as what we don't have, as far as Uber and things like that. I spent the last week, which is probably where I caught whatever I've got, riding commuter rail in the Northeast corridor for just various work and other stuff I was doing. And I used Uber hard to get to New Jersey Transit, to Metro North, to Amtrak. I mean, I rode a lot of trains, and it was delightful as far as just the ease and everything. But because Uber was there, that was what made that work. And my rides were all very short to the stations and everything, you know, relatively, you know, 10, 15 minutes tops, some even as little as 5. But I mean, we don't have that because the market says, nah, it's not worth it. So you don't need it. And that's, I think, something that we really have to keep in mind is that the market says we don't need it, but we need to, if we want the outcome that we all say we do, and for all the good reasons that we do want it, we gotta lean in to kind of help bridge that gap. Whether it is Uber, or whether it is downtown or whatever, but that's exactly the kind of thing that would really, I think, drive that ridership. So just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Okay. I mean, where do we go with that? Like, I wonder if is that something that we ask staff to, at our next meeting, kind of explore a little bit for us and bring us back? I'm not sure where downtown falls with that. Because when people ask me about Towner, I say it's basically like free Uber. You get on an app and you see the van and it comes to your house. And then people from other areas are like, why are you guys paying for that?
Right.
And I think it's a valid question, but it sounds like if we didn't do it ourselves, we wouldn't have the reliability accessibility, kind of the equity of access, but it sounds like there might be some in between.
Exactly.
Partnerships, yeah, from total public funding to, even if it was still downtowner, but there's some way to, I mean, that's kind of my thinking, is that maybe people start to pay for the rides that aren't to the transit station. Does downtowner have a partially paid, partially
Yes,
free model
absolutely.
anywhere?
We have about half the cities we're in do charge. And downtown has the ability to do whatever you want. You could, if you're under 12 and over 65, it's free. And it's, you can charge for different types a day. You could charge free if you're going to the park and ride, but $1 if you're $2 if you're going somewhere else. Yes, we have the ability to do anything that any community wants to do. Total flexibility.
I know part of our conversation was what our fee structure would be, if we were going to charge, or were we going to make it free? And I think most of council is leaning towards having some sort of a fee structure, just for that, recognizing that we are going to be responsible for keeping this going, and it needs to be funded. So I don't think we were even going to make it free to start with.
Okay. It's great to have that data that, like, it's about $9 a ride for the basalt system, aggregated and divided by the number of rides. So you're probably not going to charge enough to cover the whole cost.
Right.
But it would help.
Yeah.
And it would probably decrease sort of frivolous rides.
And hopefully there's other funding sources that will, become available down the road as you get going. Because I think with any transportation, correct me if I'm wrong, it never is like funds itself. It's always subsidized in some way. Otherwise, it's not sustainable.
Any other thoughts on the whether to reconsider the funding for local infrastructure projects, bike lanes, sidewalks, stuff like that? I think we've heard a good case from Glenwood that without that, they might not be moving into WeCycle. We've also heard other municipalities that that's kind of part of the normal business of municipalities. So do we want to continue to, or do we want to deprioritize that in some other way? If the funding's sustainable for the next so many years, or?
Well, just to echo it. I mean, we'd love to do both. It seems like there's more money generally at the state and federal level for capital rather than operating. And it'd be great to know what those options are. You've mentioned them in some of our packets. I don't know what it would take to get some of those. It'd be really interesting in our next meeting if staff could share what's needed. Has RFTA ever gotten some of those before? What are the opportunities to jointly go after some of that money? To buy some EV vans? I don't know. Again, to reduce some of our local costs, local regional costs to the projects that we're trying to fund, and take advantage of the fact that RFTA is a very successful transit system, doing a lot of stuff. It's the second largest in the state. I think a lot of people want to see it continue to grow and continue to be successful. So how do we take advantage of that to build some of these other services that we're trying to fund?
One thing I might add, I'm nervous throwing this out there, but one of the strengths that RFTA has is that we are a regional entity. And we are resourced to pursue grants. So unlike the individual municipalities, you would be going after grants individually. There are a number of grant programs out there, whether state, federal, that RFTA could pursue as a program of projects. So if there was a process in place that, say, Glenwood wanted, had a list of bike improvements, and Basalt had a list of improvements, and Aspen had a list of improvements, that there could be a large package of a program of improvements that could be submitted for grant programs.
I mean, I think that's a great option to pursue. And
Great job.
could help displace some of the current funding from the FL.
It doesn't come out of this program, but it could be a way to address some of those in a more effective way.
And I know, like, Glenwood's going through a big transportation mobility planning process right now. Carbondale's just wrapping one up and approving it in January. So we're both going to have these project lists based on a lot of outreach and data and all that. And I imagine other communities do as well. I know Basalt's been doing a lot of that with their bond. So that could be a really interesting, like, with the specific goal of increasing access to transit, here's what we need to do in these communities. Okay, so it sounds like there's support on number 2. We're doing great, by the way, because I looked at it. We had 2 hours. We have 4 questions. I'm looking at about 30 minutes per question here, and we're right at 11 o'clock. So it sounds like there's support for continuing to figure out operating. And it sounds like, I don't want to speak for anybody, so I want to make sure I threw out that idea of trying to focus the operating costs on the bike share trips and the micro transit trips to and from transit. Is that the way we want to start to look at that, like for ongoing funding?
Pushing it that direction from infrastructure.
From,
I think it's 50 right now.
right now it's 50.
Up to 50%, but we've been doing 50%. But then I think to your point, if the data is showing 25%, like it's going to BRT local stops, then should RAPID fund less than 50, more closer to 25?
I mean, I think it's still, that first 3 years, I think the model is working really well. It seems like our question is, after that third year, do we do this ratchet down to nothing or ratchet down to something else? To me, it's a ratchet down to
something else.
Something else, and it's based on the percentage of the trips that are transit oriented. That makes sense to folks. I'd like to start moving in that direction.
That's a good place to start.
With an intent to replace that funding with other sources we haven't quite thought of yet.
Okay.
Core is in the same position. We've been going through this with Core.
Okay, let's move on to the third question then, unless there's anything else on that one. The third question is, if the board does wish to fund operating requests, which we just determined that we do, should RAFLA strictly adhere to 3 years of funding at 50%, or should there be exceptions for ongoing? So I think that's kind of where we were. My only question there is, would that be applied equally to all member jurisdictions, or would we start to say, like, if you have a really small budget, we're going to fund it at this level. If you have a much bigger budget, either we're not going to fund it at all, which is the current case, or at some lesser amount.
I can't I can't answer this question in a vacuum without specifics. You know, it sounds like we're going to make strides ahead. So I think that the picture that we have of the system now is going to change. So I don't know. I mean, 3 years of 50% exceptions. I don't know. I don't know what exceptions those are. It sounds like we can't really do 50% anyhow soon. So I'm open. I don't need to make I don't need to cut anything out.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the important one on this is that graph that shows what percent of our trips in Aspen, Basalt, and Carbondale are to bike share and to micro, or bike share and micro transit, with a percent that are to the transit BRT line. Because we said we're going to continue, and we're going to basically RAPT is going to be responsible for this percentage, you know, roughly. Then I would actually increase RAPT's funding, like in Aspen, to 36% of your bike share cost. And is that where we want can we afford to do that? You know, if RAPTA can, if Aspen can afford to keep paying for it on its own, should RAPTA move in that direction, or should the exceptions be based on need?
I would say that for bike share, we do have the separate MOU and SOA. That's our governing allocation of funds through 2028. So really the exception that Troy brought up, that's really, we're looking at micro transit as being that exception. Is that the micro transit that we should be funding longer than 3 years? But I think in principle, you can think of it as being any operating expense. Something else comes up that is a long-term operating expense. Do we want to have that ability to identify that one as an exception that we might want to fund longer than 3 years as well? So that's why it's phrased the way it is, as opposed to saying, should we fund micro transit in excess of 3 years?
So clarify for me, and maybe Mirto wants to weigh in as well, but what's the long-term agreement with WeCycle then? That you're like, what's RAPTA's role in that after the 3 years? Because I thought in Carbondale, like, we drop off the cliff with WeCycle after 3 years also, and it's 100% on us.
So there's two different pieces to that. So we have obligated funding to bike share in the long term through Destination 2040 for indirect operating costs. That's going to continue. It doesn't really have an end date for that because it comes from the ballot measure. We do need to renew the MOU and SOA after 2028. What you're talking about is the FLMM grant portion. And so that is for expansion or new launch of bike share, that's 50%. So that's similar to microtransit. So really on the bike share end though, the operating is really a part of that indirect cost. The bulk of it's in that indirect cost. So really what we're funding as a part of the FLMM with bike share is really that infrastructure piece, that capital piece when there's a new improvement. We do allow the limited operating to continue, but that's honestly a pretty small portion overall. So in our thinking, we would maintain that as is, but I suppose that one piece is up for consideration as well.
Well, I'm hoping it's not too much of a tangential thought, but you look at any industry that starts up, looking at the way we're rolling out electric vehicles. Electric chargers were free and still are, but you're starting to see people having to pay for it. But once you're a member, once you're part of the program, you'll pay for it. But maybe you needed that 3 years to get used to the idea. It's the same with, you know, Netflix or something like that. Often it's like, hey, it's your same, it's with the dope dealer on the street. The first one's free, right? What you're trying to do is get people hooked and create the habits. And we've got the WeCycle habit now. We've got the transit. We've got a raft habit going. We're trying to keep it going, and we certainly can't start charging people through the nose for it now. They're not addicted yet, but the thing is that model, I think, is an acceptable model. And once people realize how valuable it is to be a member of the WeCycle community or the whatever it is, it doesn't seem out of line. People expect to have to pay for things sometimes and pay more. And I'm just wondering, are we looking at a model like that as we go forward? It's like, let's introduce it to Glenwood for free and try to get them all using it and then gradually increase the cost so they're helping pay for it. And is that perhaps is what you're doing, what you thought about, but I'd like to use models that we can take from the rest of the world that, you know, through the private industry might perhaps be solutions that'll help us get to this, because I don't want to just keep going like we are with a cliff coming up. I want to be seriously looking for other income streams and other ways of doing it. And I don't want to give up on any of the things that have been proposed to us, but it just seems to me that we're going to need to start finding ways to increase revenue, whether it's partnerships, sponsorships, increased ridership fees that are reasonable, or philanthropy.
Greg?
And also seeing
David,
just the state of the federal funding doesn't seem too optimistic right now.
David has a comment. Go ahead, David. And I see Lee has a question, so maybe you could address that at the same time. Lee, isn't the SALT in their 4th year of FLMM funding next year?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think there needs to be exceptions, you know, based on need, based on benefit to the overall system. I think we need to be flexible on it. And it's just a situation where there's so much good that comes from the first last mile system, and it can't be just a rigid thing. We need to figure out a way to make this sustainable, basically, whether it's to the funding sources and all that stuff, right? So I just think, you know, some flexibility, and like hopefully this group can figure out some models to help make this sustainable from an operating perspective going forward.
Thanks, David. And I think to Lee's question, but SALT is in their 4th year of funding going into 2025, right?
Yes, we extended it one
That's
more
right.
year so that we can have this conversation.
Which we appreciate.
Any other thoughts on this question about how we look at, or on question 3 there, time frame for operating, kind of what would those exceptions be? I think David threw out some ideas that maybe there's a list of
We'll
them.
know when we see them.
Well, but I think we gotta provide some parameters, or, you know, every jurisdiction is gonna say, well, if RFTA pays we'll pay for something, why would we, right? And so, there might be some need-based element to it, based on the percentage of your budget, something like that David mentioned, like ridership or kind of benefit to the overall system. Other thoughts on,
I almost wonder, and David, I don't wanna, volunteer you, but since Basalt is the community dealing with this question right now, could we use you guys as a case study of what would it look like now that you've had 3 years, 4 years of 50% to go to a percentage of funding based on your ridership? I'm not saying that that's the final answer, just so we get a sense of what that costs. And then we can start exploring what kind of exceptions we might consider, and play around with this whole notion of budget size and how much transit funding is being allocated, just as a way to test some of our assumptions. We could do it with Carbondale as well, just, I mean, we have a couple more years, but we can just start playing around with that. I think we're both in the same scenario. We both have about the same size budgets. And just as a way to kind of ground what we're talking about in some real numbers.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to do that this year. So I mean, I'd be happy to like to go through that process with Basalt, because we're gonna have to do it anyway, and I'd love to come up with some tools that we all could use, that not just helps Basalt, but we all could use. I don't want to get out in front of my council as far as you know, saying, no, we would charge people or do things today, right? But I think those are the kind of options that we could, you know, put on the table to figure out what we can do. And then, you know, because of the normal process to figure that out, you know, get buy-in from the council and Basalt. I also think Basalt's a great case study for the outside the town or city jurisdiction use cases of like Holland Hills, Elgibel, all that stuff. If we can figure out some of that stuff as a group here and how we're going to do it, again, that's something that can be scalable to other parts of you know, the RFTA service area. You know, what should we cover, what should we not cover, what's that criteria to do it, how do we, you know, fund it, since it's, you know, Basalt really shouldn't be paying for transportation for Holland Hills, but like in practice, that's in our, you know, neighborhood basically, right? So I think, yeah, to answer your question, Colin, I think that's a great idea for, you know, let's use Basalt as a test bed for a lot of these ideas and figure out something, because we got to do the solve this year anyway.
is that something that staff could work with David on for our next meeting? Kind of a couple different scenarios. I mean, you guys have so much of the data right now on what these funding scenarios would look like. I would imagine it'd be not too much work to spin that up.
No, that's pretty easy, actually.
Okay. And I mean, as far as outside your municipal boundary, David, I mean, fortunately, both of your counties are members, right? So I could see some cost sharing where it's like, okay, Pickens County's paying for the trips that are going within Pickens County, you know, Carbondale's down here in a county that's not a member, and that makes sense. So is Glenwood and so is Newcastle. And that makes sense. I think we're gonna probably have a harder line around our municipal boundary, but it feels like it could be more flexible in Basalt.
Yeah, no, there's so many permutations to what you could do in Basalt. I mean, like we have, like the local goes in Blue Lake, but it doesn't go into other parts of Elgibel, you know, and all of that. Like, how does that factor in? What do we want to be doing? So anyway, yeah, I think I'd be happy to do that. I think it'd be pretty cool.
Okay. I mean, looking at our questions and where we are with our discussion, we're really well into question 4, unless I misunderstood the question. Is that right? We're talking about an allocation of funding between RFTA and the jurisdictions supported by first last mile use data.
I have a quick question, maybe for David. One thing that Mike just pointed out to me is that not all the systems are designed the same way. So I'm not sure if Carbondale downtowner is intended to operate year round.
It is.
So compared to the Basalt, which has seasonal drop-offs.
Do they still have that? I thought they went to.
My understanding is they received a grant from CASTA that filled in some of the funding gaps. And I don't know, David Knight, correct me if I'm wrong on that. That's my understanding.
On what, I'm not sure.
Salt Connect, if they're still
No closures,
If there's still what?
seasonal closures
There
where
are,
the system
yes.
doesn't.
Yeah, there are. And that's mainly due, at least from the council consensus, financial reasons. What we found is whenever we had it, because as we expanded the open times, people use it. So it was one of those things that, we probably have it open year round if we felt we could support that fiscally. But, yeah, so there are seasonal closures right now.
So with that, the same applies to the bike share, where I believe, is Mid Valley now year round?
Closes for December, January, February.
So Mid Valley is a seasonal bike share system, but I think from Carbondale down, it's planned to be year round. So there's going to be different operating costs with these systems.
Yeah.
But I think the same formulas could apply, right? Whether it's like if 50% of our rides are to the BRT, it's whether it's year round or for a certain period of months, they'd be the same idea.
I'm thinking, I'm grappling with this because I'm, thinking again from Glenwood in particular. I think that we are really looking at this as a local transportation solution, as much as it is to connect that first and last mile. It's going to be a hybrid of that, because we do have kind of a large area and some connectivity problems that we've already talked about. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we are talking about like having a fee-based service right out of the gate, knowing that, so many people are going to use it to get to the doctor's appointment or get to the grocery store. So I think that that's something that, having that balance where the funding, ongoing operational funding does come, it's identified to where the ridership is, their destination, makes sense in order to kind of stretch that along. And there's an equity thing there too. Otherwise, I think Glenwood would kind of drain the coffers, because of our needs. So I think it's a very sensible way to look at it.
I think that there's a lot of value in each jurisdiction tailoring the actual services to that certain scenario. So part of what we have discussed internally, not widely, but was taking the 50% covered. So we're paying for 50% over the first 3 years. Evaluate that first 3 years for what percentage is going to transit stops. And then look back previous 3 years to see what that average is to determine the next year's funding level. Because these things, as a jurisdiction may change service levels, they may expand to a whole year, they might take out a couple months, or they might institute payment, remove it. It makes sense to look at it as more of an average over time, because we might not necessarily know going forward exactly what that actual impact may be. So that was something that we had knocked around internally, was trying to look back 3 years to try to look at that average for each jurisdiction to determine what that nexus might be.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and it would make it more stable and predictable. It wouldn't jump all over
Right,
the
exactly.
place for both sides, for RFTA and for the jurisdiction.
And then you're not picking winners and losers too based on, kind of others. Yeah.
Well, it seems like without the sales tax, the dedicated sales tax that Aspen has, or the parking revenues, you have to find some other means.
Yeah.
In your surveys, in your studies, which I really appreciate, and I appreciate Tori's request for more data, and I keep thinking about, boy, wouldn't it be great to have a way to assess the actual benefit, to the RFTA system of a ride, whether it's a ride from Newcastle to Aspen to work Hill, or a ride across Glenwood. Like, is there a way to put a number that would help us determine the benefit? Maybe you've got that already, but the benefit of a ride. So when we say, wow, we've got these really high value rides, which are so necessary to get people from, Newcastle to Glenwood, or Glenwood to Aspen, or Basalt to Elgibelt. This is a really high value ride, and we should be putting resources there. I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way to do that, because that might help me justify to my board why we want to help subsidize getting somebody from Glenwood to Aspen. And that's kind of what we've been doing. is there any way we can get, do we need better data on that? Maybe what I should be asking is, have you guys already done this and I'm just naive and don't know about it?
Well, I think trying to understand, I need to better understand what you're looking for in that.
What I was thinking is Tori and I love this whole, wouldn't it be great if our own revenues in Pitkin and Snowmass and Aspen could help cover the costs of everybody who's trying to get to our places to make a living or recreate, whatever. Wouldn't it be great if we could help? How do we justify it? And we've been doing that pretty well so far, and that's how RFTA has developed. I'm just wondering if there are other ways to make that easier.
I have a thought on that. You're training a rider, right? So if they're using, if I'm already using transportation locally, I'm more inclined to also use it regionally. And so I feel like we're kind of going at it backwards because we've had the bigger solution and now we're trying to work on the more micro solution. But I feel like you could probably just even look at just rider data and see like how often does that rider use one of these options? And now you have a habitual rider. And so I think that would give you that data you're looking at. But I think that's the cart before the horse. I don't think we have it yet because we haven't put all the pieces in place.
Yeah, we have a lot of data, obviously. I think we just have to see if we can look at it in a way that paints that picture.
If I could go to my board and say, I've got the solution to getting people off the highway so it's not so jammed up in the upper valley, it's subsidize the hell out of the lower valley RFTA. And I know we're already thinking that way. I'm looking for more ammunition.
Well, I think that's the benefit that RFTA has been able to provide to the region is that we have treated it as everybody's in it together and the resources that everybody brings to the table benefit to all.
Right.
And if we know the upper valley contributes the lion's share of the funding to RFTA, and those funds are not just retained in the upper valley, they go to benefit the whole region because we know that the whole region is traveling all throughout. So I think there's definitely, and it's to Newcastle, right? Newcastle's a bedroom.
Right.
They don't have very much of a revenue base, but we know by supporting that community and helping them enter the Roaring Fork Valley, that's benefiting all the communities
Up in
Roaring Fork Valley.
Right. I think so. So what we hear from the Garfield commissioners is like, we're not going to pay for anything. You guys should pay for it because you're generating all this. I think, well, that was true, but it's less true every year. Right now, Glenwood is a destination for workers from everywhere. So that argument doesn't hold for that, but it's still a valid argument. But we're seeing other communities are now magnets for people who have no interest in coming all the way up valley. So we need to be able to understand that well enough that when that argument comes up, we can have a reasonable argument.
Well, the reality is for the upper valley to pay for those trips, the solution is to join RFTA.
Right.
Because those funds then are being spread to those
Spread around.
communities that don't have that revenue base.
Yeah, and hopefully we're seeing some change in some of the faces at the commissioner level there, and that may bring in some new perspective. But until that happens, I think those are pretty embedded points of view, and we're not going to make impasse into that.
Can you invite Perry Hill to a RFTA meeting real soon?
I like Perry a lot, so he might be, we'll
be.
have to wait and see. But our tourism is using a data mining service that kind of like tracks how people navigate throughout our community. And I'm wondering if we can look at something like that too, to kind of see, again, like that ridership, like where they go and how they use that. I think that we're, as all this technology evolves, I think that our options for like gathering information are really expanding. And so as we continue to have these conversations, we're going to be coming at it with better and better information. So I think a lot of these questions are going to answer themselves. But, as far as the participation thing goes, it's always going to come down to the need. I think Rifle would be a great asset to the RFTA, membership is, convincing them because they're convinced that all of their
It's everyone else's
It's,
fault.
well, and it's also that it's all tradespeople that aren't gonna get out of their truck, and I think back to like when the Grand Avenue Bridge was being constructed. They came up with solutions for how to get their workers up there that weren't in individual vehicles, because they knew they'd never get them up there. But as the minute that bridge opened, those solutions went away.
What if our building permits were contingent upon them providing transportation and using it?
Well, there's a lot of service workers
Yeah.
too that they don't recognize, that live in
Yeah.
those communities.
Exactly.
But I think one thing that we could bring to our next meeting is a list of the questions for our onboard survey and see what additional questions we might want to gather.
Okay.
This has been good.
I don't think so. Do you work for the downtowner? You are the downtowner's local representative interface?
I'm the partnership director, so I work with all current 25 locations that we have, and then work on expanding in those towns and areas and trying to bring new people on board. So I've talked to Parachute and, as an example, and Rifle.
Yeah.
For instance.
Well, I'm interested, and I've always been interested in the downtowner's business model and wondering if there's efficiencies there, if there are ways for us to maximize either our relationship with the downtowner or to expand our program beyond the downtowner. I haven't been able to do kind of an in-depth analysis. The last time that I talked about this was back when just the connectivity in the app itself was a barrier to entry for us. It was some like $1 million just to build out the app.
What's app?
A downtowner connectivity training.
Oh, not anymore.
Well, not anymore.
You mean if you did like your own homegrown?
Correct.
Oh, yourself.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Correct.
And I think you guys are, later on, may have a conversation about, there's lots of app opportunity. The downtowner has a staff of 4 people that just does apps.
Yeah, right.
So, like we envisioned was what you were saying. Can you envision some guy in Glenwood that takes the downtowner from Glenwood to 27th Street, then takes the BRT from 27th Street to Aspen and gets off at Ruby Park, and then the downtowner picks them up in Ruby Park and takes them to Red Mountain to the place where they live? We have the ability to do that all in one app. So the guy just says where he wants to go. It's at his house in 5 minutes, takes him to 27th Street, and then it's waiting for him somewhere near Ruby Park to pick him up and take him to Red Mountain. Yeah, seamless. We can do that. We're doing that in some locations now.
And so as we've been talking around this, what the conversation in Aspen is like, we want more. If we could, we'd be running like 2 or 3 more cars a day, because we think this microtransit and the connectivity and the layout, right? Our valley, we have the trunk line down 82, but everything is scattershot after that. So we would want more, but the model that we have for us to double our contract is pretty sizable. So I'm just wondering if there's better service model efficiencies that we can get either with or without the downtowner, right? We're getting in valley-wide, we're starting to use a lot of downtowners. So anyway, that's the only thing that's coming up for me right now. I'm glad we're talking about this funding at this time. Again, for me, it's about how it interfaces and works on the ground and moving people from where they want to be to where they need to get.
Okay. I think we're ready to start moving toward next steps, but David has a hand up online, and then let's start talking about next meeting and agendas and times and dates, I think. David?
Yeah, no, just on Tori's comment there. I think that's something that we can pursue new use cases and should pursue them as RAFTA more than as individuals. Like there's things that you know, Basalt could use, that Aspen could use it. And there's probably a lot of commonalities and there's probably a lot of things that are already like out of the box. And best practices that we could all kind of get on board with. So I think just from like that software perspective, you know, I'd love to, you know, as part of this exercise, maybe what we're going to do, let's look at it with that lens as well. Like what's out of the box with the software, what's, you know, what would be custom, i.e. expensive, and figure out like what would make sense for the whole region potentially.
Somebody just thought something crazy since he brought it up, and that said, just imagine all the downtowners having a big RFTA logo on them and they all move around.
Yeah.
So when Basalt is closed for 2 months, one of the vans comes and works in Carbondale, one goes to Aspen and moves more people around. You know, as I see a vision here, and have RFTA be the logo. And right now, they're names things differently, right? The Basalt is the connect. You're the downtowner. You're the downtowner. I don't know if Glenwood's planning to have its name, but we would, as a company, be more than happy to share it with everybody. So maybe on first Fridays, a van from Basalt comes here because there's more action going on. And you have a big event going on in Aspen, one comes from Basalt and goes to Aspen and helps them out and helps. I mean, I'm excited about this regional conversation you guys are having because we are, you know, from Aspen to Glenwood, essentially one family. So.
I certainly appreciate that, and I've been hoping that we would get to that point in the conversation where we look at one ubiquitous RFTA, you know, whether it's RFTA branded on somebody else's vehicles or it's RFTA, it remains to be seen. What's the best way to do it? You or somebody else, but that's the direction I want to.
Right, that connectivity, that one-stop shop for your transit.
So Ben, I wanted to just piggyback up something that Tori was saying, that one thing that RFTA really wants to do a better job of going forward is working with our contract partners who are purchasing services from RFTA and providing just professional advice, expertise on their services. So for example, highlighting 3 routes here on the right. So these are, what this is looking at is passengers per. So there are services that we provide for contract partners that we've just kind of done for decades without really looking at the performance and evaluating, is there maybe a better way to use those resources to benefit more people? So these are 3 routes that I would say these are not meeting performance expectations. If this was a service that RFTA was providing on its own, we'd probably be looking at doing something different in terms of how those resources are used. So these could be also opportunities for some communities to evaluate, maybe we could use those resources we're spending on these things to do something different, whether it be microtransit or a different type of service somewhere else in the community. I wanted to highlight that just so that could be something that RFTA could help with.
Give us a sense of the cost. I remember having this conversation about Woody Creek a year or 2 ago. Was it 600,000 or $1 million a year? What was it?
Gosh, man, you put me on the spot.
600 to $1 million a year.
Several hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah,
But that,
Dan
and the rider is one of those riderships. So the driver.
Well,
maybe.
at Woody Creek, half of the ridership is the driver getting out.
So if we could go to an autonomous vehicle in Woody Creek, we could cut our ridership cost in half.
Yeah. Well,
On demand.
I mean, Kurt, I stop as RFTA acting more as a like consultant in the service provider realm. And that's, you know, in Carbondale, we've long struggled with the limitations of the circulator and wanting it to do more than it does now, but also appreciating that that cost is all on RFTA and not wanting to ask for too much. And so the idea that RFTA would sort of consult with the town and say, let's put together your first and last mile mobility package. Like, here's what RFTA is already spending on the circulator, the Woody Creek, you know, whatever it is. Here's what you're spending as a member on all these things. Let's figure out how we can do all this more efficiently.
I for one love that idea.
Well, with the savings from those three, reconfiguring those three actually subsidize the rest of the system.
There's the money being.
There is some money being said there. The city of Aspen has had our conversations about changing the Mountain Valley and the crosstown in Aspen. We are looking at downtowners as a possible help in that, especially in the Mountain Valley route. But I mean, Greg has been through this with Woody Creek. It's providing a service that's
And it's not regular enough for people to actually use it.
it's difficult. But yeah, you guys,
They're gonna drive.
you know,
Right.
you did supply Woody Creek service because you thought it was important and your constituency wanted it. And those, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that's what we're talking about is where can maybe other services step in, give us savings and the efficiencies you were talking about earlier in order to redirect some of our funds into where we need it. Anyway, thank you for that.
Maybe RAFTA needs an ambassador program and we get, retirees, to just do the Woody Creek service for. They'll be ready soon.
Colin?
No, I just want to emphasize, and I like the where Kurt's going with this, in that the first last mile actually gives us an opportunity to rethink our local services. Even right Glenwood Springs.
Yeah.
I mean, Ben hit it on the nose with the circulator. Great. Doesn't quite get us there.
Yeah.
Oh, now we have a different model. Huh? How can we rethink that? So I think there's a real opportunity here, not only just around funding an important pilot that RAFTA started, but reconfiguring the local services so we have more connectivity.
Fixed route transit service isn't always the right solution. And we now have more tools in the toolbox.
Exactly. Yeah, great stuff.
Okay, I'd love to move us toward conclusion here. It's 11:35. Let's just go through kind of, I think what we've agreed on is on the big questions. And thanks again to staff for putting together a really clear structure for us. I think this has been really productive and worth our time. Thank you guys for coming down from Aspen, and thank you, Aaron, for coming up from Glenwood, so that we could all sit here face to face. So next time, if we get together online, I think we'll be able to jump right into the meat of it, and save everybody some commute if we choose to do it that way. But it sounds like we're a yes on continuing the current programming as well as continuing the operating, but we're open to some changes to get the operating down to those metrics based on percentage that's going toward the trunk line. And we're open to reconsidering the infrastructure spending, although I think we heard a good case from Glenwood on why that can be really critical to starting this program. That right? We'll make sure we've got like those.
We talked about apps.
Takeaways. Yeah. So for next time, I think it sounds like there's a lot of interest in a deeper dive into rideshare and what that could look like. And whether that's more integrated app, interface stuff, whether that's funding for other rideshare companies outside of downtown or that might operate independently, what it would take to get more drivers to do that kind of thing. And I think that Mitch's idea of a real regional approach to downtowner, that's actually why Carbondale went with the downtowner brand, because we didn't want to have yet a third brand going that would then be even more difficult to move off of. So I think Carbondale is really open to that, and envisions it that way. So it sounds like we want to have a deep dive into what rideshare could look like going forward. And then this idea that Kurt brought up, although he said reluctantly, about RAFTA maybe helping with some of those infrastructure grants as a way to offset if we're going to remove that or deprioritize that even further from the first last mile mobility fund to get our bike lanes and our sidewalks and all that regionally up to speed would be great. And then kind of the basalt case study between staff and David or others from the town of Basalt about what that ongoing funding would look like if it ratcheted down to something like their percentage of rides that are getting to and from transit. And I would say that's for WeCycle and microtransit. Like I think we're hoping for, in the smaller budget municipalities, ongoing support for WeCycle. It's more feasible for us to fund that 100% if we have to, but it's still a pretty big hit and a pretty sudden cliff. What else? What did we not hit there?
Just to follow up on the app question, can we get a maybe at some point, maybe at the next meeting, just understand where RAFTA is with the transit app and there's a paywall somewhere in that I've never paid for. And I don't understand how all that works. I'm just wondering, is it time to take a real look at how to make the app more comprehensive and easier, transparent, so that whatever you get on, it's a RAFTA thing and off you go. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, or is it downtown or integrating into the transit app?
Right. That just, I don't know if you've done that analysis yet, or if you're.
Yeah, we can bring some information on that. The challenge is there's lots of that.
Right, yeah, and how to create the overriding app that does it all.
Or ideally that we don't have to create it, because that's its own.
We'll find it, yeah, somebody's got it.
That you plug.
Let Mitch do it.
We'll do it.
Google Maps seems to be the.
David and
default
I and
when you
we
travel.
already talked about that as an option.
Okay,
Models are out there.
yeah, models are out there. That's exactly right. Anything else for next time? And then we can maybe look at where we next. Anything from staff that's unclear that you need further clarification on?
I don't think so.
I could use a little bit more information on that service map and, yeah, I'd love to see what we're talking about, what we're looking at. 70 miles of coverage, we're talking about a lot, and I think we need to target some of them.
So what would you like in addition to, like, what's online there is the service map of the local services in the trunk line. It didn't have WeCycle or Downtowner on it. Is that what you're looking for? Or?
Yeah, the boundaries of the transit.
It'd be nice to see
There
that.
it is. Yeah, so as we always talk about it, if the likelihood of somebody using mass transit, if they live within 150 feet, are pretty great. If they live beyond that, it diminishes greatly. So I'm looking at what's our service area, who's out there that, I mean, basically, what neighborhoods, right? Let's start at somebody's homes. What neighborhoods are out there that aren't in good proximity right now and are not getting that kind of service?
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to see is where do we need this microtransit or the bike share or something? Because again, Aspen, we live in a little bowl up there and our, it's interesting because our in-town transit is more used for people getting around Aspen. But that's because for people that live up there, they're hoping to do all their stuff. They don't want to go out of town if they don't have to. So our transit really circulates our visitors, but really our residents. And so it's just hard because we're just in a small little bowl up there. We don't have a whole bunch of tentacles that aren't served by our transit.
It sounds like sort of you're looking for like something that would highlight kind of dense population areas like Elizabeth has come up that are outside of the whole network right now. I mean, Elizabeth's right on a bus rapid transit stop, but then Lake and some other places might be outside of some.
Yeah, that's helpful. We can pull together that.
That'd be interesting. Thanks.
Anything else for next time before we look at times and dates? If anything you want to add at the end of this meeting, you haven't said much.
It's been a fantastic meeting, great conversation. I think just the takeaway has been the holisticness of the conversation and the integration. I think what's exciting about where we are when I think back to the conversations we've had for years is talking about different modes independently, whereas the conversation really here is shifted all modes interchangeably for different tools at different times for different people at different. And the more that we can try to find efficiencies and opportunities to leverage each other's strengths and opportunities, that's where really the magic of this system can be unleashed in the future and truly leveraging technology on the front. Each of these services is critical in and of itself. And I think each of our services have different opportunities to bring to strengthening the network collectively if we can all look at where some of those strengths and opportunities are. So I'm really enthused about where you're headed. There's a lot of data we can all bring and collectively look at and identify where we need growth opportunities. And recognizing that this is truly what do we like, we're trying, I think you asked the question, Tori, who are we not serving? And who else can we use as our where's the low-hanging fruit that these services together can make a meaningful difference by getting fewer people on the road. I'm really interested by where we're headed. So thank you all for your time, investment, and the rigor of the analysis, because it's been there that we will find creativity and a path forward.
Thanks, Mitch.
Hey, Ben, can I just throw out to the staff and everyone else here, if there were legislative, local ordinance that a shift might actually help us get more people on the bus, that we aren't thinking about, if you want to bring forward, I'd love to hear that at some point.
If you have stuff about like with building permits that they have. to
Well,
demand.
yeah, I'm just thinking, how can we incentivize people to do the right thing? It'd be fun just to, for people to think about it and maybe something will boil to the top, bubble to the top.
Do we want to go ahead now and set our next meeting, or do we need to follow up with the doodle poll, or just even a general, like, how far out are we thinking, and are we thinking online or in person?
Every 3 months, where are we?
Well, we've
What is
been, our time frame for this was like a 6 to 7 month time frame. So
The total thing. Can't
We
do
were
it
gonna
twice
do
a month.
one meeting a month for 6 months, basically.
I think that was the goal. Yeah.
I think it's gonna be a report out to the whole board in February.
Okay. So if we could meet
January.
more before then to kind of hone in on a recommendation.
I think that was the,
Okay. But it'd be nice if we could meet once in January to take what I feel like we made some real strides today. And if we can take that toward some sort of, even if it's not a formal approval recommendation, like here's what we're thinking, what are the concerns?
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot here. So meeting in a month, I think that we can come back with where we're at with analyzing those. I would encourage everybody to think about this in a incremental steps. So we've got some big ideas out there. We also have some immediate things that we need to address, specifically how are we going to address 2026 grant funding as microtransit is coming up. So I encourage everybody to think about, okay, what can that's where we want to get long-term. Looking near-term, what do we need to do next year?
I think that'd be a good way to frame the next meeting, is bite off those immediate chunks first.
Yeah, if we could do that to give us some clarity on how to proceed as we're entering the new year, that would be great while we continue to have the longer-term conversation.
And what we didn't touch was the funding. We kind of said we want it all today. And we understand that that's the crux, is the funding. So I think if staff can come back and say, okay, last meeting, this group said we wanted to do these. Here are some options for how we might consider funding that. That seems like the crux.
So we just suggested, EOTC might ought to be here, with Linda perhaps attending these, and we should invite her, if that makes sense.
If she was
She
invited.
was? Okay, thanks.
So looking out about a month at a Monday in January 13th, do we want to try to pencil in some time then?
Works for me.
I don't think I have anything on that day. So.
Okay.
Good to meet.
Sounds like that, and maybe later in the week, like the,
It does work.
It does.
I don't have anything on that day.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Sixteenth would be better if you can do that. Out of town 13th.
and we may do it remotely. I mean, what are thoughts on that? Feel like, I think today was really important that we're in person for a long session. I'm anticipating the next one's probably 2 hours instead of 3, something like that. And I'd be okay with online if that works better for folks that commuted, or we could have
And this is a 1 hour meeting, we're thinking, or we're gonna,
maybe 2.
yeah, I've got a Board of Health meeting. It's the third Thursday for 3 months, and that's a pretty big lift for me in the afternoons. Like, I'm offline for that. So the 16th isn't great, but if it was in the morning, I could probably make that work.
Others 13th or 16th?
13th is better for me.
I can make 13th work, but 16th in the morning is probably better.
Okay. Okay, sounds like we might have to go with 13th, might be, can't work for everybody.
Yeah, the 16th I have city council.
Okay.
Is that 9 a.m.
The
again?
13th, like 9 to 11. Does that work for staff? Is that enough time? Because I know the holidays are coming up as well.
Like I said, we'll make as much progress as we can and bring that back to you, and then we'll continue to refine the goals from there.
Okay.
That works.
And do we want to shoot for in person or all remote? Do we want to have any in-person version, or
I prefer in person.
you prefer in person?
Let's aim for in person and let's do our best.
Back here, does this work, or we can move it up the salt, or?
This is available. Yeah, so.
Yeah, just keep it simple, right?
Okay. So here from 9 to 11 on 13th. Great,
Get that official invite out later today.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Great progress.
Thank you, good job.
Thanks.
For RAFT board members, just a reminder, our board meeting on Thursday is remote.
Oh, I don't think.